Okay. All right. So good evening. This is the Monday, November 17th, 2025 meeting of the Chestnut Hill Commercial Area Study Committee, Community Advisory Group. We're joined, it's actually a joint meeting with the Economic Development Advisory Committee's or board's subcommittee dealing with the very topic that we're dealing with, which is Chestnut Hill Commercial Area. And I want to introduce George Cole, who is chair of that subcommittee. And George, if you want to say a couple things, please do.
Sure. My name is George Cole. I'm a member of EDAD and volunteered to take on the role of chairing the subcommittee concerned with the assessment of the site. And EDAD is really focused on economic development in the town of Brookline, not for the sake of economic development, but basically to generate tax revenues that support all our public services. And presumably, if it's commercial development, take some of the tax burden off residential properties. We have secondary goals of encouraging housing and retail life and health of commercial areas. But in this specific case, we're really looking hard at what kind of potential development generate additional tax revenues to support the town and reduce residential tax sources. So that's our role. We're not advocating for this development per se, but what we're doing is acting as a resource to the town because we have a lot of development expertise within our group. So feel free to ask questions when appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have really 4 items on the agenda. We're going to get an update from Meredith. We have a presentation on the study area, the area design guidelines, an update from staff and from Sasaki, who has been engaged to help with that, and a presentation from Kittleson on sort of the next stage of the traffic study. And then we'll have public comment. And I've taken to saying this at other public meetings, that the reason we put public comment as the end is that I think it's advantageous for everybody to hear what the discussion is, what the committee hears, and so forth. And then you'll be able to make fully informed comments. And as always, we will, it says 8 p.m. adjourned, but we will take comments until everybody is thoroughly exhausted. Let's start with Meredith.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. There are 2 very meaty steps on the agenda, so I'll try to be quick. But I did want to present a short update and kind of circle back to an important question that I think really dominated the latter part of our last meeting. Just giving my screen a second. So tonight's discussion, we're going to focus on the design guidelines update. This is sort of like long awaited. It's going to reflect a lot of the components that we have in the draft zoning that was circulated back in September. And then we're going to hear about the second half of the transportation, or phase 2 of the transportation upgrades and those recommendations. And then sort of peripherally, we'll also be talking about the zoning. I did want to revisit the core study objectives, which are incentivizing significant net new commercial tax growth and enhancing the livability and identity of the Chestnut Hill commercial area. And as a recap, we talked about this a couple meetings ago. So these are the strategies that we're employing in pursuit of that goal of incentivizing commercial tax growth. And a friendly reminder that in terms of meaningfully expanding the commercial piece of the tax base and really moving the needle on new growth through commercial development, there are 3 remaining opportunities for the town: Stop and Shop, TJ Maxx site, and the Chestnut Hill office.
Okay. What about on that?
So in terms of, large centrally located properties that aren't within the purview of institutional development like BU, these are, to the best of our knowledge, the biggest opportunities.
Okay.
So, we've been talking a lot about the Chestnut Hill Office Park site because we have a live developer in the mix, who is providing real-time feedback on our proposed zoning and what that would translate to in terms of applicability. But also the Chestnut Hill Office Park site is unique, given it's significant for economic development potential. It's also double the size of both the Stop and Shop and TJ Maxx sites at 5.3 acres. So it's unique in terms of the study area, and it's unique town-wide. So it's certainly a catalytic parcel within the scope of everything we've been talking about in rezoning and revisioning this area. So speaking of tax revenues, I think this was presented to the Economic Development Advisory Board and the EDAB subcommittee, but I don't think the Community Advisory Group has seen these. So we keep tabs on what the kind of contribution from development projects that have been sponsored by the town's Economic Development Advisory Board, what they've contributed to the tax base on an annual basis. So Economic Development Advisory Board has been around for 30 or so years. This is sort of a reflection of, cumulatively the projects that they have championed and what the results have been in terms of additional contributions to the tax base. So for FY25, the blue represents property tax. The orange represents rooms tax. For FY25, the rooms tax number is not accurate. I think that's still an estimated number, but the property tax number is still valid. So within the past year, about $7 million in property tax revenue. And, we kind of fluctuate between $1 million and $2 million for rooms tax revenue. And that's through hotel room tax. And then just looking more granularly at the properties that feed into these numbers, you have 2 Brookline Place medical office space generates about $1.7 million a year. And then it's a slate of hotels are our next highest contributors. There's a bit of a range there from, a little over $500,000 to closer to 1.4. And then you have some office buildings. 10 Brookline Place West brings in a lot more tax revenue than that. This is just what EDAB claims as sort of their portion that they helped us support. Yes.
Yeah, 2 Brookline Place, does that include, is it the full value, or because the restaurant or whatever is on the ground floor is not filled? So will there be more tax revenue once that's filled?
Yeah, I think the hope is that will increase.
So that number doesn't include the ground floor.
Well, right, so it doesn't include the ground floor. So just to give some perspective on, for in the history of the Economic Development Advisory Board, we're looking at about $7 or $8 million annual contribution. This number has a lot of slides. You've seen a version of this slide before, and it's sort of charting the evolution of City Realty's proposal. So back in September, that was the original proposal all the way to the left-hand column. And then we have September 2025, which is the most recent proposal that mostly conforms to the draft zoning parameters that the town presented earlier this fall. And at the very bottom, so it sort of gives the added components here that I think are helpful. In our zoning, we have a minimum commercial requirement in order to utilize the overlay district. And that's a minimum of 51%. But then if you're utilizing uses that are more advantageous in terms of tax generation potential, you get sort of an effective commercial percentage here. So the September 2025 version, it complies with the second threshold that we have where you get to access the bonus height and FAR included at 61%. All the way at the bottom, we have estimated fiscal impact and estimated net new tax growth. So the estimated fiscal impact, this is a number that we get using the fiscal impact model that RKG developed with input from the Community Advisory Group. So that reflects what the tax generation potential is for the development, minus what the additional municipal expenses are related to whatever those new uses are. And then the estimated net new tax growth is the estimated fiscal impact minus what the property is already contributing to the town in terms of commercial tax revenue. So right now, current City Realty proposal is at about $5.6 million. Annual. So I just wanted to provide that as a point of comparison. and thinking back to the core objectives of the study, which is to incentivize significant net new commercial tax growth. So I think we're headed in the right direction in terms of this anticipated number. I struggle with the title for this section, but I did want to take this opportunity to do a quick walk down memory lane in terms of how this process has evolved in the vision for the Chestnut Hill commercial
Before you
area.
jump into that.
Yeah.
Was this all, can you remind us if this was, this development was all done in one phase?
No, multi-phase.
So the 6 point or the 5.6
Would
would
be
be
upon completion.
if all the phases are completed. Yes.
And what is effective commercial? What is that, those uses that bump it from 45 to 61%?
Yes, great question. I'm going to jump ahead into my appendix slides and I'll stop sharing so you don't have to watch me do that.
Or you can just tell
While
us.
she's bringing up, hotel is a significant one. Small scale retail is one, which was.
But those aren't commercial, those are effective commercial. I was just asking what are the uses that aren't in the 45% that's called commercial?
The difference between the 45% and 1% is due to the multipliers that are given to specific uses. So all of the uses are the same, but the calculation is modified to reflect the fact that certain uses are preferred either for their tax generation reason or because they're desirable to the neighborhood.
That's all those. Sorry, David, do you still want me to pull up the table?
Nope.
That the merge would be? Okay.
Drive on.
Okay. This is the existing zoning. It's a little choppy. Quirky elements are office of this block is under two different zoning districts. As you move closer to Hammond Street, looks kind of this puzzle piece effect where you're splicing together different commercial districts. This is commercial 2.0, commercial 1.0, residential. This was back from June 2024, from a simpler time when we were just focused on sort of the land use and how we would circulate through the commercial area. And we're not getting into the work of confronting, the density that would be required to support some of these uses that we've identified here. And you can see also just based on the community engagement work and what we pulled from that in this concept of the central connecting greenway, how from early on, I think we were focused on this east-west orientation for the buildings, which we have now come to understood, that north-south orientation is a better fit for the study area. So this is the proposed overlay district, 4 sub-districts. We've gone through those. These are some new diagrams and representations from Sasaki representing proposed max heights. I did want to quickly just point out, and Carlos had mentioned this one or the past couple of meetings. So for the neighborhood mixed use area, we had included an additional bonus height, which we have sort of pulled back on that. And Carlos had made, I think, the very good point of it's not particularly meaningful given the geometry of a lot of the sites and the way we've structured the setbacks. So we are proposing for neighborhood mixed use, max 75 stories, and with applying the ground floor commercial incentive to encourage sort of building up the ground floor faster with some more attractive affordability levels for developers.
Can you just remind all of us the current maximum heights?
For the neighborhood mixed use, so it's a combination of 40 feet along Hammond Street.
35.
So 35 for the single family,
And 40 for
40 or for 2 family, 40 for the multi-family and general business.
in the 1.0.
It's 60 for the office.
And here is, and Martin Zogren from Sasaki is going to be presenting the more comprehensive set of the draft design guidelines in a moment. But so this is the visualization, which I think we've been looking for a while in these conversations about the proposed zoning envelope. And we've made some modifications in terms of the sky plane proposal we had from Heath Street and the way that we structured the setbacks and step backs from the western edge to push the height more towards the Tully Street side of the Chestnut Hill Office Park block. So a key issue that was brought up in community advisory group member discussion and then in public comment at the last meeting was why 12 or 14 stories. People are still not totally comfortable or very uncomfortable with the idea of 12 to 14 stories. So I think we've been incrementally talking about, the zoning components and how we landed here, but I did just want to sort of explain my thinking about how we landed on this recommendation. And it's a combination of multiple factors. Thinking back to the exercise that RKG did back in December 2024 with the lower scale level of development, what that looked like, what were the perceived trade-offs at that point. The EDAB ad hoc subcommittee related to this study did a very detailed financial feasibility assessment back in February 2025 and definitively concluded that you can't redevelop the site under the existing heightened FAR. So, we've sort of ruled out 6 stories. It's not financially feasible, 6 or 7 stories. And then in consideration of building code compliance and other economies of scale, if it's not going to be 7, what's the appropriate height beyond that, given our goals of creating a policy that effectively incentivizes redevelopment and a significant portion of commercial within that redevelopment? And, balancing the demands of those economies of scale considerations with the additional development requirements that the town is contemplating in the draft zoning. And that's an expectation of, the broader community in town meeting. And being very clear on recognizing the limitations of commercial development opportunity in Brookline. I think we have a better understanding of that through our market study. We have a better understanding of that through what City Realty has provided in feedback with their development concepts, what we've heard from growth companies and other developers who are contributing to these discussions. And balancing all of that and keeping in mind the critical policy goal of incentivizing significant net new commercial development, given the opportunity that we're presented with in terms of Chestnut Hill rezoning and especially the Chestnut Hill office site, which is the catalytic parcel. So building code compliance and economy of scales, implications for height. As I said before, we sort of ruled out as not financially feasible the lower scale of development, which is 7 stories or lower. So, the kind of broad strokes and rule of thumb is that given the additional cost with building beyond 7 stories in steel frame construction, they're going to want to go an additional 5 stories to be somewhere within the realm of 12 stories. This is just sort of like a back of the envelope rule. So, even if 6 or 7 stories had been financially feasible, the lower scale of development, which we saw the RKG example of, is not going to provide the adequate dimensional requirements that we need to maximize the commercial piece of any mixed use development. If developers could do anything they wanted on this site, they would build all residential. It's possible for them to meet the requirements we're placing on the commercial piece, but they're going to need some residential to get something to pencil out. So we need to be.
Could you repeat that? It's
practical.
hard to hear you back here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Could you just repeat that last sentence, please?
The last sentence.
Well, penciling, needing
Wow.
residential
Yeah.
pencil.
Oh,
Your voice is.
Your voice is like you have a lot to say, and so it's like,
But you also speak
Yeah.
very fine.
thank you.
if such a roomy space.
I
We were in
know,
11
it
last
is.
time. It was much cozier. So if developers could build whatever they wanted, they would build all residential because that's really the profit driver. They can meet us where we're at in terms of requiring a minimum amount of commercial, but they have to have the residential piece to get something to pencil out. So, we need to be able to provide the adequate sort of zoning framework dimensions that they're going to need to do both of those things, to have the residential and the commercial piece. So on a related point, lower scale of development is not going to get us where we need to go in terms of incentivizing significant net new commercial development. Because they can't get it to pencil out at a smaller scale. And even if you could get it to pencil out at a smaller scale, you know, it's like a significantly smaller hotel, much less ground floor retail space. We're just shrinking the piece of the opportunity pie for Brookline in doing that. Does not maximize opportunity for active or successful ground floor retail because lower scale becomes a lot more auto oriented. It's a lot more driveways. It's a lot more parking space and accommodations for cars over pedestrian amenities. And because of that, it does not facilitate a pedestrian oriented public realm or ground plane experience. And it was very clear thinking back to a year ago, we were over at the Municipal Service Center in Chestnut Hill having our community meeting. It was very clear that the lower scale of development and having density and height at the current, what's the existing conditions was the preference. We've had to rule that out though, because of all of these reasons, financial feasibility, and in terms of the anticipated outcomes of lower scale development.
Can you just explain why lower scale development has more parking requirements and is less pedestrian friendly?
Why is it more auto and car oriented?
Well, there were a bunch of things that were said in there.
Yeah.
Not pedestrian friendly or auto intensive and more parking.
So this was the RKG. I think it's questionable whether this would do well. This isn't a financially feasible scenario, but you see dominating the driveways and the car access spaces to the smaller scale buildings. You're going to need, a smaller scale. You can't do underground construction. That's not going to pencil out. So you've got the parking
Surface parking.
in the surface parking or within the building. And then, the tension between the parking at grade and the ground floor retail, they're going to need the parking accommodation. So you can't make as much ground floor retail.
I know this is a bigger discussion, but I mean, that depends on the proposal. Like you could do an underground parking that straddles two buildings. And the only part that is surface is, so like, for example, you could do the yellow building on the left, parking that goes from the yellow building on the left to the pink building on the right, including that plaza underground, and then above ground have those two units. So, I mean, it all depends on how it's all one property. So it all depends how it's developed.
Sure. I think I would look to George or Ken from the EDAP subcommittee to help address that question.
So that's an interesting question because underground parking that's great, right? But the problem with underground parking is every underground space costs about $120,000 to $150,000 a space, and you generate very little revenue from it. So you need an enormous amount of development supporting that one parking space. So that immediately drives a larger building. If you want smaller buildings, then you're almost required to do surface parking, which just means a lot of blacktop. I think that's the short answer to the question.
Thank you, George.
I'm just curious whether we're going to see some of the data behind the penciling out. I think it would be really informative to sort of understand the numbers that inform that, some of these decisions.
Well, I don't know that we're going to. Well, we won't see that this evening, but if City Realty at some point wants to provide some of that, I think I agree with you that it would be very interesting to look at it. I think the only other thing I could think of, the only other way to get at that would be to look at some other developments that have been completed where we can get data. But I appreciate the question. I understand the question. Is basically what you're saying as well.
Did you do?
Does this,
We did.
is this right?
We did extensive pro formas, and Ken Lewis, I have to give him credit. He did spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet. And so really complicated analyses that incorporate not only parking requirements, but parking alternatives, height and how much they paid for the land and back into what things cost and what revenues are generated by what is built. So there are almost infinite permutations. But at some point you sort of arrive at like, you need a certain amount of stuff on the site to make it work. And as you may not know, I'm deep in this field, but development is extremely hard to get going right now. There are a lot of empty lab buildings. There are a lot of office buildings that are partially vacant. I personally have lost a lot of equity recently in some lab buildings. And the only type of development that seems to be able to pencil out these days is residential, because we have such an active residential market.
Right.
Hotels are surprisingly robust and financeable. And medical office is perhaps the only subcategory of office commercial that still is developable. The other food groups are off the table.
Right.
And how long is the cycle normally?
Well, so this is an exceptional cycle because we so got deep into a very specific product type of lab.
Right.
And there's so much overhang in lab right now that we don't know how long that's going to take to absorb. In terms of office, that's a almost a paradigm shift due to COVID, right? People just, everyone needs about 2/3 the amount of office they used to need because people are going into the office 3 or 4 days a week, not 5 days a week, and doing hoteling. So the ultimate, underlying demand for office is down by 20 to 30%. And, you can go downtown and see buildings that are literally being converted from office to residential for that reason.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't buy a tech on the other side of this. We're moving into new lab space at the end of the year because we can get it for a song. It's amazing. I mean, from my perspective, it's amazing. If you're,
It's killing me.
your perspective, it's painful.
I hope that partially, we
Yeah,
did
no, that's
do
all.
numbers. We're not prepared to present tonight, but we definitely can present them.
Okay.
So I also mentioned, keeping in mind the other development requirements that the town is looking for. Minimum 51% commercial, we've talked about. We're also proposing substantial setbacks from the western and southwestern boundaries of the 4.0 sub-district. And then, to really focus on the pedestrian space, open space requirements, pretty aggressive tree canopy requirements, the ground floor retail activation requirement, and restricting the amount of surface parking that can be present here. The other big constraint, which really bubbled up from the community feedback from, over the past year and a half, is the limitation to internal only site circulation. So the proposal of a new vehicular connection to Heath Street came off the table well over a year ago when we were talking about this rezoning effort and the redevelopment proposal. It's also going to be fossil fuel free construction. And we're gearing up for a discussion with the Housing Advisory Board regarding the affordable housing requirements with City Realty's development. But, there's also going to be the affordable housing, meeting the affordable housing commitments, which is a substantial amount of money as well. So there's a lot that we're asking for from this zoning. And so I just wanted to.
But those two, I mean, to be fair, those two last ones are anywhere, anywhere in Brookline.
Point taken.
Right. It's, you have the affordable housing requirements and you have fossil fuel.
Well, but fossil fuel free, it's still at the pilot level and it's not statewide at this point, right?
No, but anywhere, 10 towns, but anywhere in Brookline, if you want to do anything. So it doesn't really matter if it's 12 stories, 4 stories.
But Carlos, it goes to feasibility.
No, I understand, but I think,
The affordable burden will inevitably require more square footage to be developed on the site to support.
I think it's just when people drive around outside of Brookline to like Rockland or other Alston, where there's a lot of development happening, a lot of housing development, and they see 8 stories or 7 stories.
They never see 8. It's 5/2 or
right. So 7
4/2.
They maybe wonder, like, this is a brand new building, it's 7 stories. Why
Why can't we do this here?
Why can't we do that? Right. And I think,
Well, of course, you might, if you didn't have any commercial, then you might in fact head more in that direction. But when you add the requirement in for commercial, that means that you reduce the available.
right, but there are examples of ground floor commercial. I mean, you can see them on Market Street.
Yeah, there's a difference though between ground floor commercial and a hotel.
Yeah.
Or medical office building. Those are two very, that's a difference. Both of those are very different situations.
Okay, so last slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Martin from Sasaki, who we're very excited to be working with. I apologize, we weren't able to get those materials in your slide deck for Friday, or in your packet for Friday, but they are now uploaded in the packet material, so you can look at that. And then just very quickly, status update on where we're at in terms of progress through developing key recommendations and the deliverables, still making gradual progress on the zoning, which there's some push and pull between the zoning and the design guidelines, which we're, I'd say, a little over a third of the way through at this point. And sort of wrapping up our work in terms of the infrastructure improvement recommendations, and have made a little bit of a dent in the report, but we're starting to really focus on drafting that. And then also working on a draft memorandum of agreement with City Realty, and we'll provide updates on that. Probably at the December meeting, we'll be farther enough along, present those recommendations. So that's the staff update on Chestnut.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so next we have a presentation by, and I'm not sure, I know it's by Martin. I can't read your last name here from here. So
Yeah, Zogren.
Zogren from Sasaki, and been through this the presentation myself this afternoon, and this is worth paying close attention to. So go ahead, Martin.
I hope so. Thank you, and thank you all for allowing me the pleasure of joining you this evening. My name is Martin Zogren, as you can see on the screen, and longtime Boston resident, and I work for a company called Sasaki, who's over 70 years old. We do architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning. I am an urban designer and have worked on many, many projects across Boston and the Northeast and across the United States. So I'm thrilled to be working with you all this evening. Thank you for having us. Let me make this full screen mode. Okay, can everybody see that okay? Full screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yes, excellent. Good, good. So tonight I'll try to go through these, relatively quickly. And I know that there's some discussion that's been reserved for a little bit later on. So if we could get through the majority of the slides, that would be useful. In the overview part, that's a lot of the information that you already know. It's part of the sort of table of contents for the design guidelines that we're putting together for you all. And these, particular sites. So the overview I'll go through very quickly, mostly about the parcels and ownership, and then we'll look at some of the bigger ideas for the planning framework. Again, you want to sort of make decisions based on bigger picture ideas, and we'll go through some development principles and then some ideas about the open space as well as frontage. A very important aspect of this is going to be the public realm. I think in our experience, specifically doing development work and advocating both for cities and for private developers across the Commonwealth has really been the importance of the public realm. And once you get the public realm right and correct, and you make it a place that people want to be, oftentimes the density helps to support that, not detract from it. We'll look at those massing controls and then some of the other sort of design considerations that will go into the complete package of design guidelines. So in terms of the overview, again, the site context very, very well. These are pages from the upcoming, design guidelines report that we will be sharing with you, with Route 9 and Heath Street being two of the most important sort of corridors, north and south across the sites, of course, with the Stop and Shop site in the upper right-hand corner. You also know, in terms of the overlay sub-districts, a total of 4. So the Chestnut Hill Commercial, which is the 4.0 in yellow, the red Chestnut Hill Commercial is the 3.0, and then that mixed use and transit-oriented mixed use. And this is sort of the proposed moving forward district plan. Some of those existing land uses, as Meredith pointed out, a little bit fractured and fragmented. We know that there's a combination of commercial buildings and residential from multifamily to single family across the site, with sort of some interesting conditions along Route 9 itself, of course. Sometimes a setback, sometimes the buildings are actually close, and that sort of speaks to the changing nature of Route 9 over the past 40 or 50 years, from what had been an urban street to much more of an urban arterial with higher volumes of traffic. Of course, on the other side, that Heath Street edge adjacent to the cemetery, very, very different from north to south. But basically, those are some of our existing land uses. In terms of the ownership, there's a few, substantial owners, of course, including City Realty, which has made proposals for that first zoning district to the western corner of the site, and then some other sort of players in the game in terms of growth companies, WS Development, and even Chestnut Hill Property. So a fragmented ownership pattern, which in the areas where it's consolidated, should work to your advantage to look to increase your commercial tax base, which was sort of the subject of that first presentation. In terms of the planning framework, I wanted to pause a little bit here and sort of say, what are we aiming to provide? I think Meredith and others made a great sort of argument about sort of the values of high density and mixed use, and that 51% commercial that you're looking to provide, which is essentially about increasing your commercial tax base for the city of Brookline in a substantial manner, to go from approximately 7 million, up to somewhere maybe around 12 million is a substantial benefit. So that high density mixed use is something that gets you there, but it also means that it can provide an enhanced public realm experience if you make sure to focus on that experience that people know and see and touch and feel as they move along Heath Street, as they move along Route 9, for those ground floor experiences. We want to make sure that we're prioritizing, especially along Heath Street, a pedestrian first environment that people feel comfortable walking along that street, as well as moving towards some of the residential neighborhoods, making sure that safety is paramount. And Kittleson will be helping us understand sort of the network overall from a transportation planning. But of course, that pedestrian first environment is something that's very, very important for all of Boston, but in particular for Brookline. We want to make sure that the set-asides for open space are really moving towards environmental resilience and moving towards sufficient and large enough open spaces, both tree canopies along Heath Street and Route 9, but also importantly, the preserve or reserve of open spaces within the center of the project. And that'll be very pertinent as we look at the areas to the west. Concealed parking as much as possible. Again, the discussion that you just had around surface parking versus below ground parking is exactly right. We try to limit surface parking as much as possible and get most of that into parking garages where you can screen or effectively hide that in other areas. And that sort of goes a long way to making sure that you're not filling up your site with parking lots. The architectural design at a human scale, we're fortunate to be working with very talented architects who are making the proposals on behalf of City Realty, looking at setbacks, change of materials, moving the massing up and down, and fenestration, all of those things which together can create a very human scale. We want it to hang together as a unified district, sort of more broadly, and then think about how we might capitalize on the transit, which is available, whether it be bus or other means in the overall area. So the overall development principles, just to spend a little bit of time there. I think we'll hear a little bit more about the street network and streetscape from Kittleson and sort of that hierarchy, of course, from Route 9 to Heath Street, two very different streets, but also thinking about Tully, Holly, and Chief Street as they wind through, and of course, the connectivity that Hammond Street provides more broadly up to the Green Line station. Now, I want to pause here just for a second to sort of illuminate a little bit around what we're calling these frontage zones. And I mentioned before sort of the history of Route 9 as something that's gone from a rather urban street in years past with single-family homes and residential development to now a very busy urban arterial. that's much more highway-like as you move down the street. And as such, you see very little on-street parking. The cars are moving very fast, 40 to 50 miles an hour in many places, fewer signals, and greater setbacks for the buildings immediately adjacent to the street. So the colors here really represent, if you look at the red and then at the sort of the blue or purple color, a little bit more to the west, the areas where we're transitioning from a more, sort of snug urban condition closer to Route 9 to what's something, we're calling more of a campus frontage, which actually takes advantage of a little bit more open space, a little bit more space between buildings, and sort of a campus-like feel in terms of maybe higher buildings broadly and a little bit more open space. So that's a sort of a designation there. And then sort of that secondary frontage and many of those conditions that are either mid-block or internal to the blocks themselves. But you want to hold the corners where it makes sense. And another thing which Meredith mentioned from a plan some time ago is how do we think of this whole thing together and think of the open space network? Of course, the cemetery is a great asset to the community and open space, which is green and verdant and quiet because of its users. And we want to make sure that we're understanding how we might best sort of respond to that edge, whether it's through street tree planting along Heath Street, whether it's an enhanced permeability through the blocks themselves in certain moments shown by the green arrows, or even if there are opportunities specifically in the southwest corner to think about those lower heights in the setback and a buffer to make sure that we're maintaining a relatively robust tree canopy adjacent to the development itself. But some of those internal green spaces are very important with just sort of relieving the sense of density on the overall site itself. In terms of that public realm, again, in working with a number of developers and working with the city of Boston for many, many years, we find that the single most important aspect to require of developers is really making sure that the open space is the highest quality possible. And that includes sort of the programming, the detailing, the activation, the simple things like providing chairs, providing bioswales, infiltration, greenery more broadly. And if you can get the public realm correct, oftentimes that helps to alleviate some of the impacts, shadows or otherwise, of slightly higher densities. So we're looking to really create in the design guidelines a public realm vision that pulls all of these together and really gives good guidance to the architects and development teams for what the public realm should be. That includes everything from the quality of materials, their contribution to sustainability and renewability, making sure that the materials are durable, that hold up for a long period of time, and that they provide the sort of accommodation, whether it's for residents, visitors, folks coming to the retail for a variety of activities, and that they're appropriate both in the summer and of course in the winters that we know so well in Boston. Some of the other aspects, again, in the details here, go all the way from bike racks to seating, making sure that we're providing for that public realm, which is supporting the overall development and sort of the overall quality that Brookline has come to expect. So as we begin to look at the massing here more broadly, I think Meredith just shared this slide with you, but that's where we are really looking at several zones across the site. And you've gone through the discussion of those sort of thresholds for heights, whether it's a 4/2 or a 5/2, being sort of that lower commercial standard that we see in many places in Boston. But once we do go over that threshold, we're really looking at, for an economic feasibility standpoint, going at that 12 to 14 floor height range, which is really hitting something which is, has to do with the pro forma, but with also with the construction typology. And so that 150 to 175 foot height really conforms with this overall goal of financial feasibility and increasing your tax base. It begins to step back down as we move to the east across the project, down to that 125 to 150 along Route 9, and then to 75 for the remaining parcels moving towards Hammond Street in the east. One of the ideas here is also around this frontage ratio, which is basically the amount of buildings that you have adjacent to the streets themselves. And the lightest purple on this diagram, which you can see is the lower level and upper level frontage ratio, really are those smallest numbers, the 50 to 60 and 60 to 70, meaning that we're really trying to provide for the greatest, porosity or opening or green space as we move from Heath Street very specifically north into the project itself. So that's where we don't want to create a wall effect. That's where orienting the buildings north-south rather than east-west has been sort of the major work I believe that this committee has overtaken in the past to sort of work with the developer to figure out what the ideal massing could and should be for this site. So again, the important thing here is really that sort of lowest number of frontage along the Heath Street edge to preserve really the quality of that area itself. The massing that Meredith has shared with you as well sort of begins to look at a stepping diagram in a series of steps away from the cemetery along Heath Street, and then sort of much more drastic step downs to the 125 to the 75 in the east of the project. In the commercial Chestnut Hill commercial area 4.0, there's also a substantial step down to the west, closer to the residential fabric. And again, to help both preserve the open space and trees in that area, but then to sort of step and be compatible with that community just to the west of the site. So that's the overall massing envelope from a sort of abstract sense. And here we see those buildings currently in place, those existing buildings that you have today, varying heights, but relatively low, relatively modest buildings in there in terms of what those envelopes allow for. As we look at a section across Heath Street, you can see in the lower left-hand corner a drawing which shows where that section is located. We're looking at a substantial setback from Heath Street itself, as well as then recognizing the fact that the property is actually at a lower level than Heath Street, which helps to mitigate the height to some extent as well. The setback is very generous away from Heath Street. It's closer to 30 to 40 feet back from Heath Street, which again provides for the possibility of a double row of trees and open space in that area, as well as able to accommodate a driveway, which again is one of the requirements of the site, given that you want the circulation to be internal to the site itself. So some of those upper level step backs, as we've seen in many, many projects across Boston, can be quite effective in mitigating mass. They help to sort of break up the volumes, to make you focus on the ground floor levels, and to sort of allow for light and air into and around the adjacent areas. So just some visual examples of what that potentially might look like in a number of development proposals we're seeing across the city. So the existing condition we all know really well of Heath Street. We've had the pleasure of walking this several times with Meredith and her team, and sort of looking at that great canopy of trees, which is from the cemetery side as well as from the Chestnut Hill office side as well. And while the following renderings could use some more trees, we did want to show again, sort of at the first blush, we would see more trees in this rendering, but we wanted to begin to show what that setback would be along Heath Street and this sort of idea of these setbacks as you move up the building to that 12 to 14th Street range, the sort of setbacks of 10 feet, the rounded corners helping with those volumes. It's a bit shocking to see an image like this, I realize, but we'll all be looking at what are the sort of the trade-offs and how can we best shape this proposal to meet your needs and to meet the needs of the overall community from a variety of perspectives. So just a quick rendering. This is not what the building will look like, and we'll work, again, Meredith and her team will work with Feingold Alexander, the architects, to work with this, but looking at how the ability of changing materials at various levels of the project help to create a public realm, help to create hopefully some mitigation for the height and density, and then making sure that we're maintaining a robust tree canopy in as many places as possible. As we move a little bit farther down Heath Street into the site itself, again, looking at sort of the existing tree canopy and hoping to save as much of that as possible on the Chestnut Hill office site. What that potentially means, again, we'll add in more trees to these renderings, certainly. But the design team is certainly working to create a more robust landscape at the ground levels and looking for in these sort of red massing areas, again, very preliminary views, but these red areas are really where retail would begin to invite you into the site, into some of those open spaces. And then this is color coded as per some of the other land uses that we might see, with the gray being the garage, which would be screened. Again, that's some of the above ground garage in this example. Some quick renderings that sort of begin to fill in some of the trees, begin to add in some of the open space, begin to add in some vegetation on those ground levels, and then really push the project away from Heath Street to some extent possible, and think about sort of the activation of the upper levels of the residential and hotel with balconies and other openings that create a more of a human look and feel for the project itself. As we think about this sort of pretty robust street of Route 9 with the cars whizzing by and a pedestrian environment, which can be challenging, but also does have, some pretty robust open spaces moving along Route 9 itself, particularly at the Chestnut Hill office site itself, where their stand of older trees exists today. So on that side, we see that the development is creating the street wall condition. It's a little bit closer, but still pulled back to allow for some of that, just a few sort of what we call teaser parking spaces, the circulation, which is internal to the site. The cars can come in and sort of move around, but as much as possible, trying to make it feel comfortable for pedestrians, much like we see in some places elsewhere along Route 9. Again, color coded as per the land uses in terms of hotel, medical office, residential, and the retail, which is very important along Route 9 itself. There's a section on design controls, and I'll sort of go through this relatively quickly, but it's to say that within the design guidelines, we're being very specific about trying to make sure that the proposers, which is to say the architects and developers on the projects, are really following sort of good building standards when it comes to windows, the materials, the quality of materials, and getting the highest sort of quality project for you all, which Brookline deserves, as does many other areas of the city, but making sure that it's of a quality, which is very high for the overall community itself. So the materials and color, the sort of activation at the street level, what is it that we're looking to create, whether it's pedestrian interest, pedestrian scale materials, shade and comfort, of course, very important, both winter and summer. And then making sure that we're incorporating really unique accent materials and art and programming at the places where it's appropriate. We're looking for the transparency at the ground floor level so that people can feel engaged and look inside, whether it's retail or commercial uses at those ground floors, and also making sure that the floor-to-floor heights are high enough at the ground levels to make it feel accommodating and welcome. We want to make sure that we're incorporating art as much as possible, that it's easy to find the primary entries, and that we have spaces which are all season, which is indoor and outdoor, more broadly, both summer and winter. And finally, we're looking at sort of activating that street level, again, with a series of streets and steps where we need to go up and down. We're not pushing exhaust out onto the pedestrians themselves, and making sure that the utilities are not obstructing sort of the creation of a beautiful public realm with electrical boxes and or utilities sort of showing up in unwelcome places more broadly. So we'll look at both commercial buildings and what those might look and feel like, as well as residential buildings and that mix of the two, the windows, outdoor spaces, servicing and loading, and also thinking about the roof experience, the entries and facades. It gives you a good idea of the overall sort of structure of what goes into design guidelines, how much attention we pay to all the different aspects. And then for something like the structured parking, making sure that those entries are as hidden as possible, that they're not obstructing pedestrian uses, and that the garages themselves are screened to the greatest extent possible so that they're not visually obstructive to the overall experience. So those are all the slides. It was, a lot to get through very quickly. I'm sure we'll come back and focus a little bit on some of the street level views and talk through the massing, but it is to give you a sense of all the elements that are going into design guidelines. And I think really the takeaway here is if possible to focus on the positive sort of aspects of the public realm, the sort of the setbacks, the planting, the trees, to mitigate as much as possible what might be perceived as extra density, and then think through some of the benefits of having that density as was discussed before I started this part of the presentation. So those are all those slides, and I'll turn it back over to Meredith to sort of navigate whether we're going to questions or straight into the Kittleson presentation at this moment.
Thank you so much, Martin.
Sure.
All right. Go ahead.
Could I just make a point in terms of feedback or things that I'm really interested to hear from Community Advisory Group, EDAP subcommittee members of the public, would be the concept about the frontage and street wall. I think that's the tool that we're hoping to use to incentivize the north-south building orientation. Do you think that that's an effective tool
Can
for
we
that?
go back to that slide?
Sure. Okay, so that was
Sure.
one. So that was the first one. The revisions to the Heath Street step backs. And then this is sort of the first time that we'd seen the broader perspective about the green space network. And then I would also
Well,
just
yeah, I should
say,
stay on this one because I think the private tennis court
Carlos,
is not
Why don't we-
necessarily open space, but
why don't we get all the questions?
and just one point in terms of order of operations for the design guidelines. So the format is where we've got several sub-districts. So we're starting with the 4.0 and sort of fleshing that out. And then that's going to be the template that we're going to apply to the rest of the sub-districts. So this is a mix of the 4.0 with some of the broader considerations of the study area, but I just wanted to let people know that we'll be working on the neighborhood mixed use, the 3.0 and the transit oriented area as well.
Okay, I would like to take questions from members of the committee. And if we have time within the time slot, we'll take some from the public as well on this particular piece. There's a lot, I will say there's a lot of terms of art in here that I think people have to absorb. The presentation is available online for download on the town's website. It's under the agenda and packet for this particular meeting. And you can read all the fine print on your computers, which is very difficult to do from here. You had a question?
This is just sort of a kickoff question. Back to the massing images that you had, and I'm wondering how you thought that those massing envelopes would be impacted by the other requirements of the zoning, the open space, the internal circulation, et cetera, and how to think about those things in the context of the massing envelope.
Sure. Do you want me to answer that, Meredith?
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. No, that'd be fine. Let's get to this drawing here. That's a great question because it's interesting when you do think about the open space, requirements in terms of the percentages that we're looking for. It ends up creating a different sort of look and feel to this massing envelope. Whenever you realize, that we'd be looking for, substantial amount of open space to be sort of carved out of these yellow, sort of shapes, which are very rough and bulky, like zoning is wont to be. So while we're not going to designate for the developers exactly where they need to put the open space, this represents sort of the overall, envelope that they would fit into. And I think then as the proposals, come forward, then, this committee and others will be able to evaluate sort of the scale, the size, and the configuration and the location of those open spaces. But basically the open space diagram, in a way, if we go back there for just a second, excuse my scrolling, does reflect, a significant, buffer, which we know we're going to get to the west. And then also begins to reflect, what City Realty is proposing for that central space in the middle. So in most cases, we're going to be, wanting for them to consolidate the open space. So it's not a bunch of little drips and drabs here and there throughout the project to reach their percentages. So we thought that it was important to, at least notationally in this diagram, move them towards creating a more significant open space in the center of the project, let's say here, even though it could move east or west along in the City Realty site itself. But then also more importantly, the Heath Street sort of buffer open space, we feel is something which goes into the open space network at this sort of broad range. But you're right, in terms of a zoning envelope, typically won't represent exactly where the open spaces will go within that bigger picture envelope.
I wanted to say on this diagram that I think the private open space, like not accessible to other than members of the club, should not be defined as open space in the diagram.
Okay.
Because it's not really a space, all the other spaces as general public can venture into it.
The plaza's available for. No, you're talking about.
That's wrong with.
Oh, Longwood.
Well,
Oh,
49
gosh,
minutes.
yeah.
It looks like a really large open space.
Yeah, right, yeah, right, that's a fair, that's.
And the neighborhood probably would
Right,
agree that
right.
it's not an open space.
We kind of go strolling across the fence.
But I agree. I mean, I think proposing the larger rather than smaller open spaces in the lots would be very useful. But also I wonder how the open spaces can subdivide in a way the lots, the larger lots, by the same way that you created the arrows along the streets or along some other places, how those larger open spaces also become a connection between Route 9 and Heath Street, so that you have an equivalent kind of arrow or dotted line that goes through those open spaces, so that they become more than just dead ends. And I know that might be clear, but since you've already started to do that on the one, that one over the horizontal one.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense to sort of, begin to think about, this here, because it does replicate the sort of the overall scale of the blocks as we move through here, and it keeps this one in particular from feeling too long. And that would be, a great addition to sort of show the porosity at that point, the way in which you could move from Route 9 to Heath Street.
I turned the map,
Very good point.
the large lots into what they feel like more the rest of the scale of the site.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great.
I'd like to say something about open space.
Uh-huh.
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, Mark Cirillo, member of the committee. In terms of the open space, I did have some questions. I mean, I assume that what you're showing here are the guidelines that we want to try and build into the zoning, so that we have these interior connections and so forth. But I think that, it's not really showing a hierarchy of spaces in terms of being able to say what is going to be private and what is going to be public. What's really missing here are the sidewalk connections. And also what's missing here is the connection from that central space to Heath Street, which we talked about a lot at the last committee meeting. So, and I also am concerned about the idea that we originally, some of the ideas we had were to have some sort of central spine that came through and sort of tied this together. And the open space did not need to be the same the whole way. I mean, part of it could be a public sidewalk, part of it could be an open space, part of it could be through a building, etc. But as long as we could keep some sort of connection through, I thought would be important to have. So looking for more of a hierarchy of this. And I think that also, if we were going to talk about the street walls and the street level connection there, you have to sort of justify, the green space and the pathways and the connections with what's happening at that level as well. So I actually see maybe more of an overlay here or a hierarchy of different types of open space that the town might be responsible for in terms of ultimately responsible for in terms of sidewalks and ways or easements, and then private open space that would be viewed as well. So like when we saw that massing image of the massing on the backside, and then we saw the different colors, with regard to the levels. In terms of that street wall, I suppose what we ought to do is make sure that we have, commercial or the ability to have commercial at that level all the way around those areas that actually border open space. So that's what I was concerned about.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
If I could, Mark, I think you make a really good point about what's missing there are the sidewalks, but one of the things we're gonna get in the Kittleson report is the pedestrian network, and that's will be a sort of an extra layer that will make it clearer that there is indeed a network of town-owned sidewalks that need to be maintained, widened, in some cases available to the public.
Shouldn't it be in the guidelines too?
Well, public sidewalks, I'm
I
not
think the
sure.
widening of
I leave that to the experts.
the widening of the sidewalk is what should be the guidelines.
Yeah, the width of the sidewalk in the zoning, really. Zoning, anyway, in the regulatory.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, expanding this not just to open space network, but sort of the pedestrian realm network is really important. I think also something which addresses exactly the point you made, which is making sure in those places where, you've got people walking on streets, let's try to make sure for as much as possible, we have that ground floor retail experience so that it's active and not, the edges of garages and things like that. But I think including the sidewalks is an excellent overlay to this, and it's easy enough to do, and it really does speak to how people actually use the site and move through the site north, south, east, west.
Okay, good.
And
Yeah, great point.
I really appreciate that feedback. And then your point about making sure that we're activating the open spaces. So right now in the draft zoning, we do have the minimum ground floor commercial requirement applied to open spaces larger than 40 by 40, with the intention of making sure there's the beneficial connection between the open space activation and the commercial ground floor retail.
Okay, other comments, David, and then George?
I guess,
I have two questions. One is just if you advance a couple of slides to that frontage slide, I'm not sure I totally get what it's driving at. I think I understand the intention around the City Realty parcel and Heath Street, because we've been talking about that for over a year, and that's a very light lavender line, meaning that there's less building or more breaks between the buildings, but I'm not completely understanding what the, kind of what's being said here. And then my second question is just whether or not, how much consideration anybody's given, and including you, Martin, looking at this, to scaling the Boylston Street side. Because if we're talking about a 14-story building, if we don't have any urban scale step backs or anything on that side, we've got the low setback buildings across in Newton. And then on this side, we just have a very, very tall wall. And we can't solve we only have so much juice to spread around. Like, where do we, and so
But on the other hand, one of the things that certainly occurred to me after our last meeting was the buildings on Boylston Street are set way back and then they're flat and very tall. And I understand that's because you need to move the cars through there. And I was just puzzling over whether there's a way to move the cars under the building and move forward a 3 or a 5-story building mass there and still have the hotel drop off on the ground level, but to have a more pedestrian urban scale mass along Boylston Street, because a 14-story building, if it's set 30 feet back from a 5 or a 3-story building, you don't really know that it's there when you're on the sidewalk. Anyway, those are
Okay. Those are more comments for the developer than they are for the
Yeah, but
design guidelines, aren't they?
not necessarily, because I think we're doing an awful lot of massing and visioning, and we just keep seeing a very tall,
There.
flat wall on Boylston.
Most of the attention's paid to the Heath Street side.
I mean,
Yeah.
just ask as a clarification, along the western edge of this diagram, it looks like you have maximum frontage. And I don't think that's actually the intention, right, along the western edge.
well, there's no porosity there.
I'm sorry.
There's lower height, but there's no porosity.
Yeah, there's definitely lower height on that side. There's a substantial setback.
So, I mean, the idea is how much can you go through?
I see.
And I don't know if, so I agree with Heath Street with the larger sites, the 2 larger sites. I don't know if urbanistically it's even good practice to, and also I guess there's gonna be a 40B there, so it might be a moot cause, but along Hammond, so between on both sides, the first block before and after Hammond, I don't see why that should be that lower porosity. I mean, the light color is such such a
Good
narrow.
observation.
Yeah, Sheath Street is, but
Right.
the problem is the depth of the properties is so,
But I think the idea here is that, so when the buildings get bigger or the lots are bigger, on the Heath Street, you want it to not overwhelm the street.
Mhm.
And so you want to have some
Yeah.
porosity through by making those buildings smaller.
Yep.
And be able to go through. When you get to the lower scale and the smaller blocks, the relationship of the street with those buildings is not the same. It's more like what you would find Foolish Corner or any other place in, more urban place in Brookline. So therefore, making it more porous actually goes against the idea of it making it more urban.
oh, I see what you're saying, yeah, okay. No, I had it
And
the other way.
so that's why those 2 blocks there, the first one between Route 9 and Heath.
Yeah.
And then Heath and the other street, which I can't remember now.
Sheath Street,
Chief.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make as much sense to have them the same way. I'm still a little surprised, and I'll bring this because I have to do the scale. I'm a little surprised about the 75 feet there, because the building that is being built now is 6 floors, right? Which is already a lot bigger than anything that is in that area. That building also is very close to Route 9. It overhangs the sidewalk.
Yeah.
So it's uncomfortably, when you're a pedestrian there, it's an uncomfortable situation, but it's there, it's being built.
Mhm.
We were actually, and it has retail on the bottom floor and then 5 floors of housing. The last 2 floors are being set back. From the existing buildings, not from the corner. So why aren't we doing something like that on the rest of the blocks, the 75 because 75 feet is more than 6 floors.
Mhm.
And there's no setback. I didn't see, sort of away from the corners.
Mhm.
So the same way that, for example, you see in the Back Bay, where the corners are higher, even in the very, on the oldest part of the Back Bay, they were allowed in New York City too, every was allowed to do higher in the corners. Because there's more open space, it's viewed in angles, it's all a different experience. I think setting it back from both Route 9 but also from Chief and Heath, the last few floors would make the pedestrian experience much more amenable.
Thank you.
Michael?
Yeah, George, sorry, go ahead.
So this is just an observation. Setbacks are not free. And from an EDAP point of view, we're trying to preserve feasibility here. And if you take mass away from the sidewall, it pushes height, right? So the height is people are pushing down the building. Now we're eroding the side of the building to create setback. So setbacks aren't free for a couple of reasons. One is they're expensive to build. Two is they decrease revenue producing space in your most valuable floors. In other words, the higher up in a building you go, the more rent you can get for those floors. So essentially by creating setbacks, you're making those upper floors smaller and smaller. I'm not saying it's a bad idea because I do think it helps mitigate the impact of a building on a street. But what I am saying is there's a cost to be borne by the developer and the development that needs to come from somewhere.
Right.
And generally, and that's why, for instance, you need density to support those costs.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think some of us in the committee are also concerned about, of this committee, are also concerned about the public realm and how the typical user of the public realm feels
Absolutely.
in that space. So that's why I understand completely that the tighter you make it, the harder it is to build something to make it feasible, or for it to exist. But if you
It's a balancing
don't
act.
right, if
That's-
you don't
that's what I'm
balance it
saying.
and you end up with a public realm like the seaport, where it is a very unfriendly space for even on a summer day for the pedestrian. When you venture away from Seaport Avenue, the main avenue, you go into the back, any back street, it's very unwelcoming space. So trying to balance that with feasibility.
Exactly.
Okay, any other, so, Martha, I'd like to give Kilson their full time and then we'll come back and I promise that we'll, as I say, we'll give everybody a chance to make the comments and ask questions.
Michael, does it make any sense though to have comments since there's been all this very interesting issues about design guidelines and as it would be more germane now than traffic, but it's your call.
Yeah, well, thank you. I do want to go through, I've already put a little pressure on Kilson to move quickly through quite a lot of slides. And I think to be fair to them, I'd like to do that next. Joe,
I just had one last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Really short.
Yeah, let's make it short.
We're talking in the facades, there was the point where it was talking about windows and how to reducing the heat gain.
Yep.
Yet in all the renderings and all the things, we had massive windows and all the southern exposures without any pre-soleils or any kind of anything that would prevent the heat gain. So just make sure, I think, well, the text and the renderings have to match. Otherwise we're saying opposite things.
Yeah. Well, I leave that.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, Martin, thank you very much. So next we have the proposed multimodal capacity and safety improvements that Kittleson has come up with, we have, Juliet Walker and Reddy Nam who were here previously. Reddy, you're gonna walk through these and Juliet will do
Yeah, Juliet will,
the audio, or is that?
we'll start with
description?
the pedestrian bicycle plan.
Okay.
I think it linked well with the conversation we had about public flow.
Yeah.
I'll jump into the more traffic, side of the presentation. So,
Okay.
Juliet.
Juliet?
Great. Nice to meet all of you virtually. I know you met Radu last time. And without further ado, we'll go forward with the presentation. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
All right. So as Radu mentioned, a reminder about where we are with the transportation study. We're in the sort of phase 2 aspect of the study, phase 1 being the existing conditions, setting the stage. Tonight, we're going to talk about the proposed future bicycle and pedestrian network plan for the area, and then also talk about some potential intersection treatments for select intersections. Again, just a review of what the purpose of the bicycle and pedestrian network plan is. We are building off some prior plans and engagement around creating a walkable and bikeable network, focused primarily on the roadway corridors in the study area, but you'll see we also talk a little bit about some of the private properties and potential there. The planning process also, I'm going to start with just explaining how we identified the prioritization of where we should be focusing our efforts. And then we are focusing on also primarily on facilities for pedestrians and bicycles, but also looking at some traffic calming measures for general vehicular traffic as well. So as I mentioned, I just want to talk a little bit about the prioritization process, and that this is sort of the first step in developing the network plan, was to do this prioritization planning exercise, really looking at street segments within the study area, how best the aspects of those segments and characteristics can inform where there is highest demand and need for walking and biking facilities. We conducted the prioritization analysis based on the factors listed here. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I'm happy to go back to this. But in general terms, proximity to activity areas, so different segments of the public realm were ranked based on different characteristics. So proximity to activity areas for both biking and walking. The lack or existence of, or I guess, quality of existing facilities, existing bicycle and pedestrian volumes that we observed through our initial data collection, crash history. We also have 2 data sources from the state. One is the MassDOT Next Generation Bicycle Vision, which is focused on state roads only, and then the MassDOT Potential for Everyday Biking. Both of these are data sets that help us understand the overall importance of different roads for either biking and or walkable trips. And then level of traffic stress, which evaluates as a few different factors to understand overall comfort for a certain facility for bicycles in particular, and then also community input. And then on the walking side, all those factors minus the level of traffic stress, which was primarily focused on biking. All that being said, the first stage was to, as I mentioned, sort of develop this prioritization analysis. Now, you'll notice as I explain this, we aren't just focusing our recommendations on the higher priority locations. We understand all of this is part of a network, but we did want to understand and have a basis for some of our recommendations related to where you should be focusing, where you can have the most impact on overall multimodal safety and comfort. And the results of our analysis, you'll see the darker brown colors, if you can distinguish that color, are the higher priority locations. So they ranked higher in general through the prioritization analysis. So you'll see, for example, the concentration around Hammond Pond Parkway intersection influenced by just the overall, the ability to connect to the shared use path on the north, the ability to get to a variety of activity areas, the overall stress of traveling through that area due to the large traffic volume and the, just the general confluence of a lot of things going on there. And then similarly, you can see the other intersection at Hammond and Route 9 as well. Similar reasons for high priority. The darker orange, most of Route 9 is a darker orange or brown. So again, indicating that there's a high potential for improvement of that area for prioritizing bike travel. Similarly, for the walking network, you'll see some trends here related to evaluation of existing facilities. So most of Route 9, again, has high potential based on the desire to improve the overall safety and comfort along that stretch. Also some opportunities along Heath Street and connections along Tully and Holly Lane. So all that leads us to is the recommendations for improvements. So along with the observations we took from the existing conditions report, our prior studies, as well as the community input, we layered all of these on top of each other and developed some preliminary recommendations at a high level for this area. This is a lot to look at. I'm not gonna spend a ton of time on this particular slide because it's very busy, but I'll talk about sort of this overall study area in sub areas. But we've developed a draft bike network map for the bicycle network and then a similar one for the pedestrian network, which I'll talk about in a second. Focusing in on Boylston Street and the Route 9 corridor. Along this section, as I mentioned, falls high in the overall connectivity prioritization. It's currently uncomfortable for pedestrian and bicycle travel, not everywhere, but in most locations due to limited dedicated facilities, high speeds, volumes. I think pretty intuitive about what makes this area a little bit uncomfortable and very uncomfortable for some. So the preferred treatment for the street itself along Boylston is to provide a separated and protected bicycle facility along both sides. And there are a few different ways that we can address that. And they aren't self-exclusive. So immediately along Boylston Street, thinking about a separated bicycle facility traveling along Boylston directly on either side is sort of what was recommended as part of the Route 9 study, the prior study that was done. And generally that is the preferential treatment for a street like Boylston. Now there's certainly trade-offs to that, right? Because you have limited and competing interests in the public right-of-way. So other thoughts for facilitating travel along Boylston are looking at the potential for a shared use path. Specifically to the north here would require coordination with private property owners and then connecting north to the Chestnut Hill train station. We didn't show this, but there was talk today about the connections along the commercial properties here that could also be explored. But then we see potential for Heath Street also being a parallel route for Boylston Street in terms of providing some dedicated, calmer facilities for bicycle travel in particular. We also have identified the need for strengthening connections north and south. Again, noting the opportunity for sort of mid-property connection to the west of Tully Street for, again, shared use path, and I'll talk more about what this means. We have some examples. Can be both for bicycle and pedestrian travel. And then looking at opportunities for improving bicycle travel on Tully and Holly Lane. Tully Street and Holly Lane right now would be constrained for dedicated bicycle facilities bidirectional, but you could either do this as a paired bicycle lane, one way in one direction on Holly Lane, one way in another direction on Tully, and or, as I mentioned before, work with abutting property owners to look at opportunities to widen for dedicated bicycle facilities. So that's the Route 9 section, and I can come back to each of these if there are specific questions. Briefly for the Hammond Parkway location, the focus here is extending shared use path connections that currently exist north of Boylston, south into Brookline, and then also facilitating connection with the bike lanes along Heath Street. Also, all of these would be in conjunction with intersection improvements that we will consider later on in the presentation. And then along Heath Street, I alluded to this earlier. So some sections of Heath Street where there's likely to be new development, looking at opportunities to provide a separated path, shared use path along Heath Street, maybe in conjunction with a public realm improvement. Areas that are currently primarily residential where that's not likely to happen, looking at traffic calming, similar to some potential improvements along Woodland Road as well, where you've already done some initial traffic calming, looking at other mechanisms for making it safer and more comfortable for bicyclists to share these travel ways with cars. So moving on to the pedestrian network, similarly, this is the overview, and then I'll break it down into each of the areas that I described before. So some overlap again with the bicycle improvements related to the shared use path on the north with the connection to the train station. Similarly, the connection to the west of Tully Street. Noted earlier in the presentation tonight was the opportunities for widening sidewalks. So if you're expecting a lot of pedestrian traffic along some of these areas, looking at opportunities to really make those sidewalks comfortable for folks to use two-way and with strollers or mobility devices, et cetera. So looking at opportunities for widening sidewalks in conjunction with private property owners. Also looking for opportunities for strengthening connections across Boylston Street. Here we note, and this could be both for pedestrians and bicyclists, but noting the potential for a mid-block crossing. It would be a signalized crossing, pedestrian signalized crossing at this proposed new connection from Heath Street. We also note the need for improvements to the existing rapid flashing beacon, which is a pedestrian signal that already exists, and we need some upgrades to really make it safe and comfortable for the volume of traffic along this section. And then generally along Boylston Street, looking at opportunities for providing wider sidewalks and street trees and landscaping. On Hammond Street, again, not much here, but looking at the opportunities to coordinate the intersection improvements, make those more safe for pedestrians. And then Heath Street, similar to what we talked about for the bicycle connections, looking at traffic calming opportunities on Heath Street and Woodland Road, also the pedestrian crossing improvement. So some of the opportunities that we talked about in the network plan will also identify preferred facility types. So some of the things I mentioned in the prior slides were shared use path, which is typically a separated, literally shared path for both bicycles and pedestrians, requires a certain width so that it is comfortable if you have shared bi-directional travel. Also, something that I think that the town is already considering, buffered bike lanes, where you have a standard bike lane with a striped buffer next to it to sort of encourage that separation between vehicular travel and bikes. Other things for pedestrian improvements in particular, having some consistency in high visibility crosswalk applications, looking for opportunities. This could be one of the things you consider with the traffic calming, raised crosswalks to raise visibility of pedestrians at certain locations. This one also shows some bump outs or chicanes as well. The two different types of pedestrian signals. The rapid flashing beacon is generally okay for lower volume roadways, but for the higher volume traffic areas, you really want a pedestrian hybrid beacon, which is a full stop for traffic. Curb extensions and median island, other things that are the median island is already out there. There's some opportunities for improvements on Route 9, and then curb extensions are another traffic calming, high visibility treatment for pedestrians. I alluded to the idea of chicanes or traffic calming that's considered horizontal deflection. You can do both median treatments as well as what they call, chicanes or bump outs that sort of cause traffic to meander, which slows traffic, can have the effect of slowing traffic speeds. And then vertical deflection, where you're already applying this on some of your roads, which is the speed hump is the most common. Also a raised crosswalk, which I talked about before. All right, so that concludes the bicycle and pedestrian portion. I don't know, Meredith and folks, if you want to pause and talk about that first before we go into the intersection.
I think I'd like to go straight through and then we'll come back for questions.
That sounds great. All right, then I'm going to turn it over to Radu, although I'm going to continue to present.
Thank you, Juliet. I'll try to speak towards the public so everybody can hear me. But in the last meeting, we noted that we're going to use an intersection control evaluation procedure, which was developed by MassDOT and it's used on their projects. The reason we're using this procedure, Juliet, and we're going over the overview, is because it presents a comprehensive approach to evaluating intersection operations, but intersection changes. It also considers safety, mobility for people walking and biking. So that very well integrates with the design guidelines for the site and with the bicycle and pedestrian plan. So that's the procedure that we're using. From the phase one part of the traffic evaluation, we've honed in on 3 major intersections, sort of like our key intersections to look at different alternatives that may improve both operations, safety, and mobility. And those are, Route 9 and Hammond Street and Heath Street, and Hammond Pond Parkway and Heath Street. There's some additional intersections within the system that are secondary that provide like assistance, and you'll see that in just a second, like Polly or the interchange at Hammond Pond Parkway that are part of the analysis. Now, we started off with a pretty wide range of intersection types, and I spent some time last time describing them. This is just a list to kind of highlight all of the options that we started off with at each of those 3 critical intersections. We've applied a set of evaluation criteria to try to dwindle that down. And really the evaluation criteria tries to find solutions that balance the needs at the intersections, which relate to both safety, operations, to the site constraints. So trying to find solutions that fit the site, but also incorporate a wider variety of thought and data than just traffic operations. So we applied that criteria to all the options that I presented in the previous table, and all of this will be documented in a technical memorandum. The presentation is available. I'm racing against time here. So you can look at all the options that we've evaluated, and what we screened down as preferred alternatives are 2 different alternatives per key intersection. It's primarily making traffic signal upgrades and lane configuration changes to the existing traffic signals to make them more efficient or make them safer. And then for Route 9 and Hammond Street, we're looking at a restricted crossing U-turn intersection type. I'll describe that in a second. Hammond Street and Heath Street, we're looking at a quadrant roadway as a potential alternative to the traffic signal. And then Hammond Pond Parkway and Heath Street, the alternative to the traffic signal would be a single lane roundabout. Starting off with Hammond Street and Route 9, the improvements to the traffic signal that exists there today would be to add left turn lanes, to rearrange the lanes on Hammond Street itself, to have dedicated left turn lanes. That allows us to use protected phasing for the left maneuvers off Hammond Street. That increases the efficiency of the intersection decreases the potential for angled crashes, so increases the safety for motorists there. And it really doesn't preclude us from adding signal enhancements to protect pedestrians or to use a leading pedestrian interval for the intersection when pedestrians are crossing. It's really effective because it uses the space that we have at the intersection. It doesn't impact the corners in terms of the right of way. So from that perspective, it has advantages because it fits in that footprint. I think the next slide is just going to kind of go through those. So you have documentation of the benefits and some of the drawbacks here. There's only so much we can do with a traffic signal in terms of optimizing the traffic. We're still working with the existing width of the roadway. We would be losing a through lane on Hammond Street, which could still, create queue spill back down to Heath Street. So that's the main drawback to that option. The second option is the restricted crossing U-turn. So what happens here is we're trying to create efficiency in the intersection by removing the through traffic from Hammond Street and the left turn traffic from Hammond Street from directly accessing Route 9. So in order to make a left turn or to go through on Hammond Street in either direction, you have to do some out of direction travel. So you're making a right. All movements out of Hammond Street are right turn movements onto Route 9, and you're traveling down Route 9, you're making a U-turn, and you're coming back towards the Hammond Street toward the intersection, and you're either continuing on Route 9 or you're making another right onto Hammond Street. So Juliet, the next slide should provide some context of why this simplifies the operations. It removes a lot of the conflict points that happen at one specific location, which is the intersection itself. So you go from about 16 crossing points at Route 9 and Hammond Street to just 2. With the restricted crossing U-turn, the only 2 crossing maneuvers are the left turns off Route 9 onto Hammond Street. And that increases efficiency, increases safety, but adds some out of direction travel. It adds new U-turn locations that have to be built and would have their own right-of-way needs, potentially for right-of-way acquisition. It does create, potentially new opportunities for crossings of those U-turns, but it's not as, neatly packed as the existing intersection. From a pedestrian bicycle perspective, it can have safety implication because it reduces the number of conflicts. It can reduce the crossing width that people experience crossing the road. But it does add a level of complexity because through the RCUT, you have to be staging the median sometimes in order to make a full crossing across Route 9. So both the traffic signal and the RCUT have opportunities, but also some constraints associated with them. And moving forward, we will spend more time looking at those opportunities and drawbacks. So Hammond Street and Heath, again, the traffic signal could be updated in terms of lane configuration on Hammond Street to create a protected left turn lane in the northbound movement. That reduces the potential for angled crashes. Again, it could introduce a protected left turn phase. So when left turns off Hammond Street go to Heath Street, they have an arrow that the traffic in the opposite direction is stopped. So you don't have the issue of people trying to find gaps in traffic to make that movement. However, this again, it's pretty neatly packed in that intersection, but it's still impacted by the queue spillback that can occur from Route 9 into this intersection. From a pedestrian and bicycle perspective, we're again looking at creating protected time within the traffic signal phasing when people can get out into the crosswalk, can start to advance and not conflict with other cars, and that exclusive left turn lane removes one of the potential conflicts between cars trying to find a gap in traffic, looking for cars or looking for the pedestrians that are in the crosswalk. That, we're removing that, that potential conflict there. So, the second alternative at this intersection would be to apply a quadrant approach. So this simplifies again the movements at the intersection between Heath and Hammond Street by moving the left up the street to Sheaf. So if we go to the diagram, I think that's going to speak a little bit better to the conflicts. We're going away from, we're moving from 16 conflict points to about 11 conflict points for the main intersection, and then 9 more at the two intersections that are created. So the challenge with this configuration, it will create more efficient operations. It reduces again the conflicts between cars and pedestrians at the intersection, but it does create out of direction travel. And Sheaf actually puts us closer to the Route 9 intersection. And we know we already have a queue spillback potentially building up on the south leg of the intersection. So, we really have to dial in a little bit of the analysis to understand how that queue spillback would interact with the lefts that people are making off Hammond Street now at Sheaf instead of Heath. Some other drawbacks, the Heath Street would have to be a two-way roadway, not a one-way. That requires the loss of parking on one side, which is probably disadvantaging the businesses on that block base. Moving on to Hammond Parkway and Heath Street. The signal option could be improved by taking the center lane, converting it to an exclusive left turn lane for both approaches of the Hammond Pond Parkway. Also adding a right turn lane on Heath on the west leg, so coming into Brookline. Both of these additional lanes increase efficiency, but also improve safety. This is a location that's notorious for the angle crashes between people trying to find a gap in traffic with two lanes approaching them from Hammond Pond Parkway to Heath Street. So that left turn lane would really help that operation. The additional right turn lane on Heath Street would make operations more efficient, but that could also attract more cut-through traffic on Florence Street to Heath Street. Because now the intersection's operating a little bit more efficiently. And it could also have some right-of-way implications on conservation land, which is adjacent. So it's not a slam dunk option with the traffic signal. The second option at this location would be a single lane roundabout. This would require narrowing Hammond Park Parkway to a single lane in each direction before the intersection itself. From a footprint, and this is just a general footprint, I guess, I wanted to overlay it on the rotary. It's about 1/3 of the rotary that's at the other end of Hammond Park Parkway. So this would be a very small circular intersection, a roundabout, definitely not a rotary like we have down there. The benefits are better operations overall, lower cost long term, decreased. So in terms of that's a good slide, Julia. Thank you. So from a crossing conflict points standpoint, roundabouts have 0 crossing conflict points. There are merging maneuvers which happen at slower speed. And they're diverging maneuvers when you're exiting the roundabout, but there's no potential for T-bone type crash, which leads to a more severe, sometimes fatal crash. So that's really the advantage of the roundabout. There are only 8 potential conflict points within a roundabout design, and that's why especially single lane roundabouts tend to be much more safe than round or traffic signals or traditional four-way stop intersections.
So you're talking about one of these flat,
No, it wouldn't necessarily be a flat central island. It would
Yeah.
still have a central island,
right?
but it would only have one circulating lane.
Right, but when I say flat, I'm thinking about the ones that have, they may have a central line, but they also have a slope that you can have a fire engine.
Yeah,
for the maneuver.
exactly, yes. There'll be the truck apron for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of advantages with the roundabout from a safety perspective, from a traffic operations perspective. But the footprint, would impact, most likely all four quadrants. So without sketching one out and understanding, a few more details in terms of their impacts, it's difficult to say, to what extent, like, we would get into like an Article 97 right-of-way acquisition type of process, which, could derail the development of an alternative like that. So our next steps is to work on finalizing those concepts, finalizing the network plan, and to really start a coordination with City of Newton, MassDOT, and DCR, kind of show them what we've done so far and see how it's received. And then hopefully kicking off the phase 3 in January. So.
Okay. All right. You've done very well. As you know, I was very concerned about time. I appreciate that. As you work through this and hit the high points. So again, as with the design guidelines, the entire document with all of the detail is on the town's website. If you download the packet that comes with the agenda for this meeting, it's all there. I've been looking at it myself on my own computer to read the fine print. So questions from the committee, and then I want to take public comment. Go ahead.
Hi, there's a lot to unpack, but I'll just point a couple. Can we go to the first slide of where it showed all the different
Alternatives.
where it showed the paths, the bicycle path. I think it's a little rich for Brookline, not for us, but for Brookline, to be suggesting anything on a private land in a different town. If we want a peg path, do it in our town. So we need to figure out how to do that north path in our town. I mean, right now
it's not doable because the
then
town boundary is. So I will say that I bike through the back of the street.
Right, but then maybe the solution really is Heath Street.
Yeah.
But I think if we propose something that like this, private land in a different town, they're like, the hell.
Yeah. Well, unless we talk to Newton and they, but it is private land. So.
Yes, and so if there is a lot of bicycle traffic, they may be concerned with their own pedestrian traffic and how that
the impact
impacts their commercial activity, which is why they're there.
Yeah. So I have to comment.
So I think it really has to be on our side and figure out how to do it. I mean, if we can't do it, then maybe that's telling us something.
Yeah.
The next one was, I think the same thing with the pedestrian. I think we just need to do the pedestrian along Route 9 a much more beautiful, or not beautiful, but much more better experience. Because I think the moment you do Route 9 a nicer experience, you also are telling drivers. So Route 9, for example, when it's Boylston Street, when it's when it goes into Boston, it's Huntington Ave.
Yeah.
It's still Route 9.
Oh, yeah.
It's still like 2 lanes or 1 lane, well, it's 2 lanes and 2 lanes with integrated trains. But what makes it feel like you're in the town is sort of the density of the housing and the sidewalks, and you're like, that you feel like I'm not on a highway anymore, I'm sort of.
That's a horrible transition, right? From
Yes, but it
Boston
is, but
to
people are going slower.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think what we really need to achieve here is how to, and it's the same thing, we had the same discussion in the south, I mean, the lower Boylston Street committee discussion, which is how do you turn Route 9 into something that feels more like you're in a street rather than a highway? And I think by making the sidewalks, by not ignoring the sidewalks, but by making the sidewalks a much more pleasant experience. It's something where, the more people that are on the sidewalks, the more people, the drivers are going to feel like, oh, I'm in the city rather than in a highway. The more buffers we put, the more it's going to feel like a highway. Which is sort of counterproductive, or intuitive, but it is the reality. It's same with that when we narrow. So I think if we increase the pedestrian activity on Route 9, I think it'll be a much more pleasant experience for everybody. And if you go to the next one with the different crossroads, for all of them, I don't see other solutions than the signal improvements. I think if you go next one.
Go to the diagrams that show
The one where you
quadrant and
have to do a U-turn into.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the archive.
Yeah, that's just silly because you're just feeding the pipe more water than it already carries. I mean, it's like if that was made out of rubber, it would just be like a big bulge of water there that's trying to just go around in circles. And also it's just confusing because when a fire truck is going, I'm assuming, I mean, I don't know if they're going to be physical barriers, but I'm assuming a fire truck is going to be able to go straight onto Hammond across Route 9.
It could be developed that way. Yeah.
Right. So which means that when a fire truck is coming, no one's going to know where to get the way out of because they're not going to know that they can go across. Mm-hmm. This happens on Wellesley at Route 9. And there's a big sign that says cars only because trucks can't do it. Hammond Street is the connection to our DPW yard. So all the plowing, trucks, gravel, everything goes down Hammond. So it needs to be truck friendly, unfortunately. So I think, this diagram, I just find it silly because you're basically adding more traffic to Route 9.
Okay.
And then if you go to the next one, I think adding traffic to the neighborhood is something we definitely don't want.
The quadrant, yeah.
The quadrant. So if I were living there, I was like, no way do I want all that new traffic that didn't exist in there. And then the third one, which is the roundabout. I just think, how are you going to tell those row houses that they're going to lose their front yard? I mean, just the eminent domain or whatever it is, it just doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
So those are just my.
All right. Linda, Roseman is online. Go ahead, Linda.
Thanks, Mike. A few things. One, I want to just emphasize what Carlos said about enhancing the pedestrian experience on Route 9. The second very quick thing is we need a stop sign at Tully and Heath Street. But the main thing I wanted to ask about is the development that's being proposed at the corner of Hammond Street. It's Hammond, Sheaf, Heath, that where the Cleaners is now and where Michael Hines is now. I haven't heard anybody even mention that. That's going to add a lot of density and a lot of traffic. And I was wondering whether the people doing the traffic study had taken that into consideration and in all of the things that they're looking at.
So, Juliet and Radio, you're familiar with what Linda's asking? There's a new building that you could, the 6-story building is not quite complete. Mm-hmm. That, as we've said, overhangs the sidewalk and looms looms above us, but at the diagonally opposite corner at Sheaf and Hammond, there's a proposal for what will probably be fairly similar structure in terms of height and hopefully not setback, but if it's a 40B, we don't have a lot of power over that. So that will contribute to, and I think that's actually a larger proposal.
Large.
Is that more, that's a bigger building?
Double.
Yes. Bigger,
Yeah, a bigger building, so there will be some traffic contributed by both of those. Both of those properties.
And weren't they doing something to the parking and the street? With that project?
The parking
is. Yeah, while you're here.
Yeah, the DPW approved a bump out and a pullover area for Uber and Amazon and things like that. So a slight change to one side of that project. It's the 40B was approved, but it's currently under appeal. So that's the status of that.
And so
45 units and 6 stories.
25 units.
45.
45. Oh, okay. And the pullover for pickup and drop off is on Hammond?
It's on Heath.
On Heath. Okay.
So, we did share the traffic impact report and all the transportation related analysis from the Heath and Sheep project with the Kittleson team. In terms of I guess I'm not 100% clear on the question, Linda, in terms of.
Well, I haven't heard any mention of that project at all, and it seems to me it would have a pretty large impact on traffic. It was mentioned that some of the traffic in one of these plans would be sent, down Holly or Sheaf Street, which, they're not very big streets, and if there's going to be additional density there, that just sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, so just to chime in on where we are in the process, we are just basing these recommendations on existing volumes. The next phase would be to do future projections, but we do have that information. And Linda, that's a very good question. I think that would be part of what we would really inform the next step, which is, how will these be influenced by projected traffic?
Okay, great. I just want to make sure that it was on your radar.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, other comments from committee members? Okay. Now, let's take public comment on any of this. I beg your pardon. The first thing I want to public comment, however, is Jennifer, you want to speak to the poll that?
Yeah, just briefly. My name is Jennifer DePazzo Gilbert and I represent City Realty. So City Realty is thinking of launching a website probably after the first of the year that would have all of the project information, the various iterations, the contact information, etc. We've been at this for a year and a half. And the goal is to put all of the information on one website so folks can see it. So to that end, City Realty hired Northwind Strategies, a communications company, to assist with the launch of that. And we found out on Friday that they started a random phone survey to collect data, information, see what people knew in the general public about the project to date. And we got some feedback on that and we have stopped the survey. Number one, it's premature. And number two, I don't think we need a survey to figure out what to put on that website. So nobody should be getting calls or surveys. So I just wanted to let folks know that.
Survey's out.
Yeah, but it's not, there won't be any more phone calls or anything about it.
So there was a survey that somebody sent around about Chestnut. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you actually look at that survey?
Yes, I've seen the questions in ahead of time, but I didn't see the final. So yeah, but no one should be getting calls. It's a little premature and I don't think it's needed, but the website is going to launch if all goes according to plan, probably after the first of the year. And I think that'll be helpful to give folks who know nothing about the project some information, and then the folks that have been following along to put it all in one spot.
Okay, good, thank you.
Sure.
David Schreiber, Schreiber is.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. I just want to point out, as an experienced and regular cyclist, I have yet to find a rotary that is anything other than damn near suicide. So please consider that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that insight. Cyclist myself, so I understand. Okay, here we go. So we have a sign-up sheet, actually. So the list of people on the sign-up sheet is Katha Seidman, Joe Bullard, Greg Hoffman, Rhea. Sorry, Rhea, I can't read your last name.
That's Paul.
Paul, there we go. Ben Eisenstein, Blair Hines, and Martha Jorshak. So let's start with Kath.
Is it possible to, I didn't see the sign-up sheet. Is it
Oh, sure. Well, that's your name. Yeah, go ahead.
Lisa Sultani?
Lisa.
Sultani.
Okay, thank you. And anybody else who hasn't spoken, well, it's not excluded. You're not excluded. Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Should I go?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't paying attention. My name is Katha Seidman. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 2. I'm on the Brookline Commission for the Arts, and I'm also a board member of Brookline for Everyone. But tonight, I speak only for myself. Redeveloping Chestnut Hill Park has townwide significance. It represents one of the most important opportunities Brookline has had in decades to deliver a substantial new housing, commercial development, and sustained long-term tax revenue on an underutilized parcel that has been targeted for rezoning since the 2005 comprehensive plan. The current proposal would bring over 250 new housing units to Brookline, including a substantial number of deed-restricted affordable homes. It would add over $8 million to Brookline's Affordable Housing Trust, funding future affordable housing production townwide. It would deliver a hotel and commercial space, bringing much needed services and vibrancy to the Route 9 corridor. It is also projected to generate over $5 million per year in new tax revenue. That's nearly $400,000 per month, a staggering amount to be leaving on the table while the site languishes. Some folks have suggested that this developer does not need to build 14-story buildings, asserting that much less height is all that would be appropriate on that site. However, simple economics tells us that any development project that provides significant financial benefits for the town can only be undertaken if there is enough finished volume to create a reasonable profit. In this case, the volume sought is a ratio of 4:1 of finished floor area to lot size. In order to achieve that volume, we could allow a single 4-story structure to fill the lot from edge to edge. Or we could permit a few much taller buildings and provide the kind of housing density and open space that will create a vibrant, walkable neighborhood, including large space-defining plaza, a green buffer on the west end, and the enhanced walkable tree canopy along Heath Street. Some folks think that developers greedily profit off of people's need for housing. But how many of us gratefully allow restaurant owners to profit off our hunger? And let movie producers profit off our desire for entertainment? How many of us happily grab an Uber or Lyft to avoid searching for a parking space? Like all businesses in America, developers are able to add homes and commercial real estate only when their project has the potential for a reasonable profit. I congratulate the leadership of Meredith Mooney, Michael Rubenstein, Mike Sandman, and the CHCA Study Committee, along with the cooperation of City Realty for negotiating the mix of uses now being proposed for Chestnut Hill Office Park. I urge you to move quickly and constructively to complete this project. Brookline can't afford to let another decade or even another month go by without moving forward on developing one of the few large-scale, underutilized sites left in town. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kat. Joe, and I would appreciate if you, I should have said this to Katha, keep your comments to more or less 3 minutes. I'm not going to cut any.
Do the best I can.
But I know you are particularly able to say what you want.
I'll try, but my remarks aren't prepared, but I will say that my name is Joe Bullard. I'm a almost in a butter. I only live about 300 feet to the west of this place. And, what we're getting here, what's being dumped on us is a limit. This is too big and too tall and too much stuff in one space. It's really a shock to the area to have, to go from what's there now to what is proposed. And these meetings, there had been, I think, at least 20 meetings on this subject. And I've been to most of them, and I never saw the end of one lead to the beginning of another. It seems like the goalposts are always being moved. It's going from 20 stories at this end of the property to 14 stories down here, to 3 buildings, to a few buildings, to setbacks and sky planes and stuff like that. It just doesn't seem to have a focus. You know, it's almost like a ball of yarn or several balls of yarn that look like one ball of yarn. But I just won't ever stop saying that it's too big. I also think that as neighbors on the west end of this property, that it's almost our duty to fight to keep this thing small, because this thing is going to march from the lower playground spot down through across Tully Street and go to Holly Lane and then go to Heath Street, and step by step, almost like Jacksonian seizure, that it's going to take over the neighborhood. We have neighbors and friends that live in those future areas that are going to be built, and if we leave a line of marcation that's 14 stories at our end, what's to stop the next developer to say, well, I'm going to start at 14. This is going to be the shallow end of the pool. And when I head for Holly Lane, I'm going to get up to 20. And the guy that's going from Holly Lane to Hammond going to say, I'm going up to 40 or something like that. It's crazy. It's way too much money. And I'm sorry, way too much bricks and steel and mortar and stuff. And I also wonder if the town is opening floodgates to other developers. They're going to look at a property that is zoned a certain way and becomes available for sale and just says, City Realty got away with it. They started with something that was 2.0, and with just a couple of dozen meetings, they got it up to an FAR of 4.0. You know, I can buy this thing. I can buy part of Coolidge Corner. I can buy the shops at Putterham. I can buy parts of Washington Square that are already shot. And the buildings that are in those places in the olden days were called taxpayers, because a person would buy a plot of land and build a 1-story building that has a hardware store, a restaurant, a pizza stop, or something like that, a barber shop, just to pay the taxes. Well, it's not, economics isn't like that nowadays. You need something pretty substantial to pay taxes nowadays. But I wonder if other developers are going to come in and just take over these taxpayers and put multi-use properties, commercial combined with residential up above, and further shut out the younger generation that can't afford to buy in this town at all. I think that things should be kept small in this town so that younger people just getting out of college can afford to buy a single family or a 2-family home or a condo of their own. Finally, I'm going to close right here, Michael, that one of the slides that was up there, it was from the first presenter from Suzaki. It was all red, and it had a red building on the left, and then a sidewalk, and then a roadway with cars in it, and then the cemetery over on the right. And from this far back in the room, it looked like the cemetery property starts to get green at curb height, and it doesn't. The cemetery property is behind a wall. So when you're on the sidewalk on the lower playground side of the street and you look across the street, you don't get that perspective, that aerial perspective. Everything down there is green and rosy. What you see is a little bit of pavement and then about 5 feet of wall and hardly any green at all. So I don't think that they meant to mislead us, but they may have. And when they showed the photograph with the new building overlaid and the car going down the street and the cemetery wall on the right, they made that cemetery wall very skinny. It's only about as high as the top of the car. And it's kind of disingenuous actually to present it like that. If you're going to let them put a big wall on this new development side of the street, you're not going to, this term come up over and over again. I already forgot about it. But what you're going to be doing is completing the canyon, because on that side of the street, there's already a half a canyon wall. And when you put a big building close to the sidewalk on this side of the street, we're going to be in a funnel.
So I really don't want to argue with you, Joe. There are 2 things that I want to say. One is let's deal with the design guidelines and the zoning require something low along East Street on the city vehicle side.
Sure.
The second thing is there's the zoning, the way it's been proposed, steps down towards Hammond, not up.
Well, why do we get the high point of the
Well,
front?
so the high point is at Tully because, and I think we were all, when we first heard the first proposal, we said, well, why don't we put the height? Why isn't the?
I remember
the
that,
other
yeah,
end?
the 20-story end was an hour.
Right, that's right. So to say that nothing has happened, that's not quite right. But it's been moved down as far as it can be on that site from the west side of the property. So I really don't want to quarrel with the issue of whether 14 stories is acceptable or not. That's not my point. My point is that the zoning is offered as protection for the thing that you're concerned about west of something. It's FAR 4 for about a block and then it goes, I think as far as Holiday Lane, and then it drops down.
Okay, understood.
Okay, Greg.
So a lot of content to respond to in a short period of time, but I think what I'd like to do is maybe summarize a conversation that was a very constructive conversation the neighborhood had with Michael Rubinstein.
Yes, Michael reported
last week.
Yeah.
And I think, the top line is thinking about what the goals are for the project, which is to generate commercial tax revenue for the town. I think as, the neighborhood as residents of the town and taxpayers, I think are in support of that goal. So I think our goals are aligned as a town and as a neighborhood. I think the question that I have really is, comes down to the process again, and really it continues to feel that we're establishing zoning in reaction to a commercial developer who has a difference of interests. And I think coming back to, my sort of general questions here are understanding that the neighborhood also want like a development to go in there. There's no value to us in having a vacant lot in the neighborhood. But what I'd really like to understand, I think there's a lot of content, but very little information or data in this presentation that really helps us make informed decisions. So coming back to the process and thinking about how you would establish zoning, I think it would be really interesting to understand, again, some of the data behind these, the pencil calculations that you're doing to really understand what kind of volumes are going to be required for this to be economically viable for a developer, any developer, not necessarily the developer that's purchased the parcel. So that we can really understand what are the kind of concrete financial constraints that are going to be required for this to be commercially viable. And so, in that framework, I think my own also kind of view on this is that we're not obligated as a town to make this profitable for City Realty. That I think if we had a forward-looking process where we had set zoning first, my question to the committee, and I'm curious to hear George's perspective on this, is had this been zoned appropriately in a way that kind of would get the outcomes that we're looking for in town in terms of commercial, a high density of commercial real estate for tax revenue purposes, would City Realty have made this purchase at the beginning of the process? And are they really the right developer for this site as a primarily residential developer? And so, my question to the committee really is, do we have the right partner for the town to get the goals of the town? And are we retrofitting the zoning to a partner that may not be the right partner for the town? And that's a hard decision, but we're not really obligated to, make up for what may be poor business decisions on the part of a particular developer any more than in my business, making drugs, for example, that don't require the regulators at the FDA to change their rules so that I can make a profit. I have to sort of operate within the bounds that are established for me. And this whole process feels like we're retrofitting the zoning to fit a particular developer's interests rather than really other interests of the town. And again, similarly to this, I'll say again that just the general lack of data in the presentation coming, a very minor point, but on the traffic discussion, I think Linda made this again. We've got a large list of things that we could do, but what would be much more helpful to make decisions would be to sort of see concrete projections on what's the increased volumes of traffic that we expect and how specific solutions are going to mitigate that. And I know that there are quantitative models that will allow us to make those projections. And I think all we saw here today was just a list of options that I think anyone could have come up with. So not particularly informative in terms of driving decision making.
Well, you're right, that it's just that on the traffic, there was presented as a list of options. The next stage is to do what you're asking, it's just to tie a recommendation to data. But George, go ahead.
So your points are really, really thoughtful questions. We experienced before sort of COVID, the most robust period of real estate development activity, really probably the city has almost ever seen since the late 19th century. This site basically lay fallow. So there was something fundamentally going on, either poor ownership or zoning that would not allow redevelopment or expectations of the old ownership on value. But nothing happened. So there must be something underlying, some underlying reason that made redevelopment infeasible. And then the markets changed really, and commercial development became very difficult to do. Right. So in a sense, you're right. We're responding to current and foreseeable markets. And the foreseeable market driver right now is residential. Right. And is that going to change? Of course it's going to change in ways we can't even predict. But what we're trying to do is reconcile the town's needs for tax revenues and housing, frankly, with something that would be long-term acceptable or even beneficial to not only the neighborhood, but to the surrounding communities. And we're trying to strike that balance. And we have done the data, and we can do a separate presentation on EDAB's analysis, on our subcommittee's analysis on why we felt that additional FAR was really required to get going on this site. In 20 years, it'll be a different story. We know that. But if we want to see redevelopment in a reasonable time frame, say the next 5 years, this is what it's going to take. That was what our analysis said.
But George, I think Medina's DRA was very different from Marty's redevelopment equivalent.
Mayor Walsh,
Mayor Walsh, and also Mayor Woods. So I think that was also one of the things that spurred development in Boston was that Menino was not there anymore.
But it wasn't only in Boston. I mean, look at Somerville. Look at Watertown. There was even in the suburbs, there was generally a lot of redevelopment and development.
But they were all sites, much larger sites that were previously industrial, semi-industrial, or different. And Brookline has never had any of those. And I think that's one of the big questions or one of the big reasons why it's different in Brookline, because all the sites have been smaller. We didn't have a 70-square factory that had to be redeveloped. We didn't have the Watertown Arsenal that was sold and was able to be redeveloped. We didn't have any of those things that all these other towns have had. Newton with Needham Street, the factory that used to be there, or on California
Right,
Road.
and that's why this is such a rare opportunity to have a 5-acre site in Brookline on a major artery.
But then you have 10 Brookline's Place, which, we went through the process and it was too big.
Well, so that's a very interesting example, because the underlying value of the building as it exists today is so high that to basically vacate it, demolish it, and have that as your land value, you'd have to build something enormous. I mean, it never made any sense, honestly.
Right.
2 Brookline Place was a different story. Remember, you had the 2-story, essentially commercial, relatively low value property, and that could justify a land value if you built sufficiently large, and, you know, I was involved with that
And that's lower
15 years ago, and we had to go for a new height.
12 stories, right?
Well, that was actually 10 tall stories, 125 feet.
10 stories and a good setback.
Well, good setback from one side and not so much from the opposite side.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just want to say, this is a public comment period, and I appreciate, it was a specific question to George.
Yeah, no, this is
But I don't want
This is one of the more helpful
discussion.
Actually.
Can I just,
It is good discussion, Claire, I agree with you, but I don't want to cut it off, but I do want to, I want my colleagues here to remember that we want to hear from these folks primarily. Go ahead.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up, just because I thought this was really helpful, and I think maybe the outcome of this is it would be really helpful to have a follow-up presentation that goes through the.
With the
data.
discussion.
Yeah, and I guess my sort of two follow-up questions, one is that my understanding of the original EDAB recommendation was more like 70 or 80% commercial. And I think the proposal that we're seeing now is significantly more residential. And then I think the other calculation gets into, again, the stated goal of this being, I understand that housing is a really important need in Brookline. I'm aware of that, and I think support that. The question is this the right site for that? And if this goal is really about generating commercial tax revenue, we saw a really interesting analysis from this committee at some point where it was essentially the trade-off of, as you get more residential, your net tax revenue goes down because of the cost of services to the town. And so it's not clear to me where we're hitting that. And so again, I may be incorrect about that, but I think these are the kind of concrete numbers that would just be, it would simplify all of this. We could have a pretty quick conversation
So
and
you
understand the constraints on the problem.
recall the discussion that residential per square foot yields more than commercial in terms of rent to the developer. So, in the process of squeezing down from the total that was originally proposed in terms of square footage to where we are now, you'd have to change the balance of commercial and residential. If it was mostly commercial before, you've taken a lot of that away.
But you have to add the services too.
Sorry?
So commercial, I mean,
And-
residential,
yeah,
has
residential
this is
has
helpful.
to provide-
school children, and if they,
But again, like this would be pretty easy to put in a table and actually.
It is, and
right?
you know, one of the things I was thinking about is doing, I suggested that we have that we ask Ken Lewis to come in and go through in some detail, the very things that you're asking about. Because I think it's a legitimate question. Martha, you're shaking your head. I'll let you shake your head when you're up to speak, which is a couple more people. Okay, anything else, Michael, you wanted to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say, I think you've asked a really key question. And the way that I interpret your question is basically, if City Realty wasn't in the picture, right?
Yeah.
And we were but the town was trying to create zoning and design guidelines and a package for a developer to do an economically viable development on the space, right? Would it be significantly different than what we have on the table? Right.
Yeah,
And
roughly, that's right.
And I believe, based on the work that you've done and the work that RKG has done in terms of the taxes and the commercial revenue and what's economically viable in this market, I think the answer is close to no. Or it would change very little.
Yeah.
Because of the open space requirements, the parking requirements, all the other pedestrian amenities, which we actually value. All of those things coming together, independent of the particulars of the City Realty proposal. I think that in order to produce something that would actually lead us to a viable development, it would be relatively close to what.
I agree with Mike. No, that's helpful here. And
Yeah,
again,
but
if we
that's a
put this
range,
on,
it's not an absolute. And there hasn't been, and this whole issue is about process. So there's a range of development that could be developed there that would be acceptable, but it's being treated like an absolute.
Martha, if you really do have to, if you want to speak now, then not later. Rhea?
Well, I'm Rhea Paul. I'm a town meeting member from precinct 17, but tonight I'm speaking on as an individual. And I simply wanted to be here and have a chance to say that I understand there are a lot of concerns and questions about this project, but it's been a project that's in the works for years, and we in Brookline desperately need both more housing and more tax revenue to increase our tax base, to be able to afford to keep the great things that we have in Brookline, the great schools that we have, the great public amenities. None of those are free. We have to somehow keep on paying for them. And we've bumped up against some limits in terms of the tax base as it stands now. It needs to be expanded. As has been said many times, this is one of the few opportunities we have in Brookline to do this kind of expansion. And I think that the presentations tonight have shown us that we have a group of people who is extremely competent, dedicated, and thoughtful to and fair-minded, who is willing to take public comment into account in order to tweak the kinds of changes that people are concerned about in order to make this project not only economically viable, but acceptable to the residents and the neighbors. I just don't want to see the baby thrown out with bathwater. This is a once in a lifetime chance for Brookline, and I would just hate to see it not taken advantage of to the max. And I just hope that people will continue the conversation in the vein of moving towards realizing this project in perhaps a slightly different way than it's been presented to us tonight, but eventually realizing this project to both increase our housing stock and to provide valuable increase to our tax base. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben, Eisenstein?
Hi, yeah, my name is Ben. I've only lived in Brookline for about a year and a half. This is the first time I've been at one of these meetings. And I just want to say that I'm really grateful to all the work that the town, the developers, and the experts have done on this. This seems like a place that I would like to go to and visit. I would love to see more housing in Brookline for all types of people. Speaking as a member of one of the younger generations that this gentleman referenced, I need more housing here and more affordable housing if I have any hope of staying here long term. Speaking as someone who likes living here, I would love to see more third spaces of the kind that are being proposed here. And I would love more tax revenue to the town so that there can be less tax burden on individuals. I would agree with everyone here who has said that I would love to see this discussion moved in the direction of how can we make this happen in a way that is amenable and beneficial for all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Blair, Heinz.
Is it possible, Mayor, to put up one of those zoning maps that you have up here?
Sure.
So one of the things that's been confounding in coming to these meetings over the past, we're going on 2 years, is that there's this bifurcation in the Chestnut Hill commercial area study about creating zoning, or is it about a particular development proposal? And it kind of bounces back and forth, and it makes it very hard to concentrate on what's the on the process, because the process keeps on getting fragmented. If you could get the one that's more just a flat zoning piece, that would be helpful. So I've spoken to a lot of the individuals on the committee, and I've spoken at meetings to say that as abutters and neighbors, we want to support this. And I think there's a lot that's happened that is in the right direction with the changes. And that there's clearly a conflict that this rezoning needs to balance. Impact on the neighborhood, the town's needs for additional commercial tax base. We're aware of that. And importantly, the need of housing. And so we're with you on that. I think the challenge is, and I think this is one of the things that George spoke to, is where's the economically viable area here, especially now that we're in a kind of a crummy and commercial development environment.
with the prices of materials are going up a lot. And, as I think a perfect example of the fact that it's not a very robust market is, think about that great project on Durgan Garage site. That had a lot of public input. A lot of work was done on it. The building's been torn down and nothing's happening. So I think that speaks to the fact that there's something precarious going on in the market here. And now we're being asked, and I'm in support of, changing the zone that's going to deliver a great deal of value to the landowner. And in return for that, we want something to happen. And I think we're in a bit of a dubious place right now economically. And so I think that's one of the challenges that needs to be factored in here. So this fact that we sometimes get characterized as not being, we don't want any change, I don't think is true. And I think that, I might not speak for everyone in the neighborhood, but I think most people that I've spoken to the neighborhood realize that there's going to need to be more height here than we prefer and more FAR than we prefer. That does not translate into, in my mind at least, into 14 stories. I think we've been going in the right direction. And I think that we've been put constantly in the position of opposing things and bringing up what we don't like rather than what we do like. And I want to kind of just underline the fact that the first person, that came to the neighborhood to really kind of listen to us was Michael Rubenstein, who met with us twice. And, to really kind of hear out what we want. And I don't think the neighborhood has been invited into this process. And we've been trying to, get behind it. But at some point, we're going to have to just get against it. And I'd rather not have that. I don't think that would be good for the town. And, just in a kind of cheeky way, there was one of the if you look up at the zoning map there, we're looking for more commercial development. I did some, I like the Longwood Cricket Club. I noticed it's not included in the study, and it would just kind of, we could put overlay zoning there so that that could become another future location. They can still be a tennis court, but they could have a zoning of 150 feet and an FAR of 4. That'd be a little bit of a, tweak, kind of being cheeky about it, but, and the site over there where the CVS is, that could have a lot higher zoning. And so I point that out only because we're kind of like making accommodations for what's existing there. Well, one accommodation I think that needs a little bit of more consideration is our very small, one of the last few affordable neighborhoods in town. I don't think it's going to be here much longer. Certainly the area up around Sheep Street and between Holly and Heron Street. I think in 5-10 years, I think that's going to be gone. And, it just feels like, and there are some other sites. And I would ask other people in town to consider, what if along Harvard Street, right now the rezoning there was for 4 stories. That's not economically viable. What about having 180-foot buildings along there? I'm not proposing it, and it's not being proposed. So I just think that there needs to be a little bit of moderation here. It wasn't proposed down at the Circle Cinema site. Sure, why couldn't have that been 150 long? And I've been advocating for and trying to get people to come around to that. If the height here and the FAR here was more commensurate with what happened at the east end of town, I think you could probably drag an awful lot of people in the neighborhood, maybe kicking and screaming, to that would be something that was a little bit more in proportion and more in keeping with the town's character. So that's where I'm at. And so I hope that as this project moves forward, there's a little bit more give, because I think we're being asked to do a lot of take here, in terms of this development. So I thank you for listening to me, and I hope that you reach out to the neighborhood a little bit more and have a kind of a hands-on discussion. So we're not just coming in at the end of a meeting that's too long to try to, to kind of work with you. Thank you.
Mike, I just wanted to correct the record of something that was said before.
Right.
So I'm looking at RJK feasibility study, June 24, 2024. The high scale scenario, which is this one,
Yeah.
9 stories.
Mhm.
So it hasn't always been 12 stories.
Right.
And I just wanted to make sure that it's clear. It has been mentioned that it's always been, this high. It hasn't always been.
And what's the FAR for the?
It's, I don't know, I haven't looked at it right now, but the height is what was proposed. It still has lots of green space. It's not, it's pretty similar to what we're looking at in setbacks and so forth. So I'm just saying that we want to make sure we say something that is accurate all the way through. And I do think that since the realty proposal came on board, it did go up substantially in height from the original talks that we had with the neighborhoods.
Where the neighborhood was not in opposition to that.
Okay, thank you. Martha?
Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity now to say something. But I want to say, probably related to some of these other comments, that this isn't actual engagement with the process. Once again, we've been presented with very little advance notice. Maybe it came out on Friday. I do not check on the weekend the Chestnut Hill area study slides and maybe agenda, and maybe it's there and maybe it's not. But we find ourselves once again having to react, not be a part of, but react to a dense, complex, often unreadable slides with information from Sasaki. So you have put us in the place of reacting rather than being a part of the process. So I wanted to make that comment about process, but also to clarify, because in the beginning of this meeting, no one has said, we have a new consultant now offering lots of information about the design guidelines. And I'm curious, I understand they've been supported by Chestnut Hill, by the city realty management. What exactly is Sasaki's role and authority in the?
Let's get an answer to that.
So Sasaki is helping staff with the visual representations of the zoning, and then creating a set of design guidelines, which have accompanied all of the rezoning efforts, with a more visual set of design guidelines than we had anticipated creating at the start of this process. Like the existing ones are multi-page Word documents. I think in this day and age, we're going to need more visual representations. So Sasaki, the contract that we have is between the town and Sasaki. We have limited resources. I have very limited budget. And City Realty, it's not uncommon for us to ask developers to help support different parts of our study process. And the design guidelines was a part of that.
Transparency would be.
I mean, in fairness, we had mentioned the fact that we would be bringing on a consultant to help support with the design guidelines, and the fact that we need more visual design guidelines.
Yeah, supported by the developers, like just the piece that, like, you say, not important. I say, interesting. Just saying. Yeah.
And you want to go further? I interrupted. I thought.
No, I said, I made a significant comment about the process and the way in which we are once again in a position of reacting to a very dense, confusing, not clear set of slides. And yes, to reiterate what other people have said, we are in for making something happen here. So that it's not the case that we're not. So that's the note I'd like to end on.
So I have, you're right about reacting. First time you hear information is, after all, the first time. This is the first time I've heard it as well. And I agree with you. I know I have to get into reading this stuff in detail in order to understand, well, what are the implications of these design guidelines? That's true. Yeah, it's a little bit less true of Kittleson because I understand a little bit more about transportation issues. So I'm perhaps not as not as neat of as much taking a very close look at it for the first time as most people. But you're absolutely right. We're all reacting to the same thing. First time you hear something is the first time you hear it. And there's really no way around it.
I think there is, but that may be another discussion. You could set up a meeting where there was more opportunity and time for give and take. Like a week later, let's go back and look at that for people who have the time to come and talk about it.
Yeah. Well, that's not, so that's on the table after all.
Well, you could set it up then.
Yeah, okay, so yes, right. We're absolutely trying to do that without anybody, but you know, how do we do that without making you feel like you're just reacting? What are you looking for?
Well, I would, off the top of my head, say there was a lot presented in that presentation by Suzaki, had a lot of information, and it ties into the zoning. And when we give people 3 minutes to talk, and yes, we extend that so we can be here till 9 o'clock at night after sitting here for 2 hours of presentations, that's not really a good way to set up a discussion. So let's find a time a week from now when open meeting, anybody who wants to come can have time to talk about 3 points. What are your questions about the design proposals? What do you have issues about? 2, what are your questions about the zoning? 3, I don't know, what are your comments about the traffic flow as you heard about it at the last meeting?
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna have 2 hours of meeting or an hour and a half or whatever. Come if you can.
So sort of like office hours for this,
I guess, but it's a meeting that's structured a little beyond office hours because part of what makes this a real give and take is that there are many people in the room who are sharing different points of view, not just me sitting with you or writing a memo about it. It's a, you know, the whole is greater than the parts kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So you're saying have the presentation and then have some space or time to think about it and then have the discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, we all write our contact information down on the sheet when we come in to each one of these meetings, and we've probably did 20 of them. And there's never been a proactive email to the community saying, here's the agenda for the meeting. Here's the materials that are going to be presented. We'd like to have this discussion. We're finding out about it, you know, proactively on the website.
Sorry, there's a sign at the sign in about how you can subscribe to receive the updates
Okay.
about the meetings and the meeting materials and the agendas. That's how the process works. And
Yeah.
in Brookline, we're just following the structure that's been dictated by.
But I guess it's fair that the guidelines came in
That is fair.
today.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and that has
Again.
been, we've struggled with that at every meeting with.
Okay, well
Yeah,
then, if
absolutely.
it's gonna continue to be how it works,
Yeah.
let's do differently how we engage with it.
Okay.
Just
Point taken, and I appreciate it. And I will say, I think everybody's gonna be on 3 minutes instead of worrying. And that's fine, because I do want, it's very useful to hear all of this. Let's see if we can feed it back to you in a way that you're comfortable with, because you're obviously not, and that's not good. Lisa.
Hi, who's this? My name's Lisa Sultani. I live in Chestnut Hill on Middlesex Road. Lived there for over 20 years now. I'm a teacher at the business school. My husband's a professor, and I mention this just because if we were looking to move to Brookline now, it would be completely out of reach. And I am concerned about sort of what's happening in the town. And I think so a lot of people in this room are concerned about affordability, but we come to kind of different conclusions about how to address it. Like, to my mind, supply is the way you solve affordability, whether it's market rate housing or affordable housing. We're not going to get there with little piecemeal projects. And I feel like, you know, the ADU law, I actually looked into building an ADU in my garage. My sister is disabled. It would be great for her to be able to live closer to me. And it's cost prohibitive. The construction costs, it just doesn't make economic sense for somebody to do something like that. We're not going to get like this explosion of ADUs. We're not, you know, someone mentioned the MBTA Communities Act as like, oh, it's kind of small potatoes because it's only 4 stories tall.
Well, that was by design.
I understand.
Unfortunately,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
did
no.
not talk to the planning board about what he thought might be more economically viable. And we had some comments.
Oh, okay, Blair,
Sorry,
let's just go with the flow.
Okay. So I don't know, like, and the reason I'm here, I'm not involved in these things. But every time I drive by the lot at the corner of Western Bar and Route 9 and see nothing happening, to me, that's a little frustrating. Like, what happened? I don't know. That's outside of the scope of this committee, but like, I feel like I want people on this committee to know that there are people in the neighborhood who actually want the housing to come, who want, who view Route 9 is like this. If not there, then where? Right? We have this, to me, a very exciting opportunity from what I've learned tonight, of building something that's actually meeting multiple goals, the town's revenue goals, affordable housing goals, and feasibility for a developer. And I really feel like you don't necessarily hear enough from the people in the community who are sort of okay with these things. And so that's why I'm here. And so, you know, I have aging parents. It would be nice if they could move somewhere close by, and they can't because it's so expensive. And I don't know, you know, we can sort of debate whether a project like this would have any kind of impact or what the cost associated with these units would be. But I do feel like right now I'm worried about the town. As a teacher in the school, I'm worried about the, you know, the ability for our school to function with staff cuts that seem inevitable unless we can get an override passed. And if we are a town where people you have to have $3 million or $4 million to buy a single family home, that means you can also send your kids to private school. That means you're not going to vote for an override. And we're gonna end up in a, you know, looking a lot more like Cambridge than Brookline. And I worry about the character of the community too. But I think I'm thinking more about like the larger community, and we need to have sources of revenue. We need to have affordable housing. We need for teachers to be able to live close by. And I just think this looks like, to me, a project that would accomplish a lot of those goals. I'd also like to say that, like, I'm used to going to school committee meetings. And in terms of like the give and take conversation, this is like incredibly refreshing. Like, I don't know if you're ever watching the school committee. It's like you get up there and you talk and no one says anything. So I kind of, maybe because of my experience with the school committee, I feel like there's a lot of responsiveness here. That's just an observation. And I'm coming away sort of like a lot more confident that the people in this room, including some of the people who are objecting to aspects of the design guidelines, you know, actually really want something to happen at this site. And that the people on the committees here are actually really interested in balancing the needs of the abutters, the broader community, and economic viability of a project like this. So I just wanted to say, I live in the neighborhood too.
Thank you. Stephanie Walker is on Zoom. Stephanie.
Hi, here, let me just lower my hands. It's not in my face. So I just want to quickly say that, you know, I think someone else said this, and I think that there is sort of this sense that somehow there's a group of people who are in opposition, and just reiterate, we say this every meeting, that we're not in opposition to development at any of these sites. And I think we all recognize the need. And I think, you know, we recognize that it is a delicate balance of a lot of factors. So just say that I would like us to move away from this narrative of being oppositional, or that there are people who are you know, having opposition to this development, because I don't actually fundamentally think that's true. I think one question or just one comment I want to make is that there's a lot of comment about residential, and I think we keep missing, because we're so hyper-focused, and this has come up a couple of times tonight, that we're focused so heavily on this CRM site that we keep forgetting there is an entire area of which there is already a building going in with 5 stories of residential, and a proposed residential in the area that Linda brought up, in the, where the Heinz and that's going in, right? So when we act like there's no residential, that's actually the more done deal in all of this than anything is those residential sites, right? And what I think is concerning is that we don't talk about those every time we talk about this other site. And I brought this up over and over. It's an entire area. This is a Chestnut Hill commercial area study. And we focus so much on this 4.0 sub area and not the holistic view of the whole thing, which frankly goes back to the original question. I think that some folks, and Greg was one of them, who said, you know, are we looking at the right amount of commercial on the 4.0 site when we know there's already residential on these other sites? And, you know, do we need to be beholden to the developer and their resident need to have residential for profit? I don't understand that. And I think that we need to keep pushing back to this whole area. I have also a question because Meredith, you mentioned with the design guidelines that we would start with the 4.0 and that would set the tone for the rest of the area. And I find that interesting since the rest of the area, there's already development happening and building happening on the corner of Route 9 and Hammond. So how do design guidelines in an area that has not been settled yet, and the zoning isn't settled, can't influence design guidelines on the rest of the site if building's already happening? Same with the traffic situation, right? We can't be leaving out what we know is already happening to sort of figure out what's happening at 4.0. So I think we really need to, I keep saying it, we need to pay attention to the entire site and balance the needs of the entire site, not just the 4.0 and not just what the developer needs to make a profit. And then I think the last thing is I just want to, what Carlos brought up was something I had, actually I was texting Greg, that if you go back to the RKG studies from, I think nearly a year ago when we sat at the DPW and also on Zoom or places and heard those, the RKG study, those heights were lower. And I think one of the things that happens in terms of process with these meetings, as someone mentioned, is we kind of move from thing to thing to thing to thing, and we lose the continuity, we lose the thread of where we've started. And you may all remember there was a petition signed by a large number of people about a year ago saying we supported the findings of the RKG, and then we suddenly lost that thread of what RKG recommended. And so in the vein of having data and having a consistency, it would be nice if we could start seeing how this all fits together. If the town paid the money for the consultant and there was information there that was helpful and useful, it would be nice if that was continually threaded through the conversations. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Arslan Aziz?
Yes, thank you. Is my audio coming through?
Yeah, audio and video both.
Great. Apologies. I started this on my phone and now it's like a weird video on my phone. Thank you. This is Arslan Aziz, town meeting member, precinct 4, but I'm speaking as an individual here. Just want to first thank the study committee for their due diligence on this. This is definitely a very complex project. So I moved to Brookline a few years ago. I've been a town meeting member for about a year and a half. I think what's become clear to me, and just generally in the Boston area, is in Eastern Massachusetts, is that the way that we've approached zoning has been excessively restrictive in nature historically, and it's kind of led to a situation where there is a dearth of housing in Brookline. I think we all agree about that, and we all wish there was more housing opportunity for everyone. I think it's kind of a blessing that there is this adjustment of increased residential in this property because of the benefits to having the additional housing, both market rate as well as affordable units, and as well as a projected multi-million-dollar contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust. And in addition, that this project is also bringing significant revenue to the town itself, and we sorely need revenue. Otherwise, it's just going to result in increased property tax burden on residential and on homeowners, which is going to make things more expensive for people. So this process has gone extensive review and iteration, and there has been flexibility from the developer, just from my observations. I think on a broader level, it's not in the town's long-term interest to allow these kinds of projects to be stymied by multi-year procedural hurdles. Yes, the developers need to be responsive, but they're also acting in good faith in working with us as the community, but also realizing that this is someone who's working in a capitalist system. They're working for a profit, but there's benefits all around, right, to allowing new development and all these other benefits. So I just want to commend the committee for balancing due diligence, but with an expeditious timeline to draft this new zoning. And it's clear that there's a lot of benefits to this in terms of housing, town finances, and revitalization of this underutilized site. So I'd just like to see more projects like this around Brookline. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mike, clarification. Is the affordable on-site housing or pay to the have?
Both.
Both?
Yeah.
At those numbers that were mentioned? Okay.
The concept is that the condominiums, rather than build affordable, condominiums on top of the hotel, rather than build affordable condominiums.
So that part goes.
That part would be contribution, and the affordable housing would be in the block of what, 243 housing units?
Building C. Yeah, building C is about 140 units, so that would be on site.
On site, 140 units.
Okay.
And then this is not a housing choice because of commercial and all that. So it's so there's another. So for example, tomorrow most likely, the town will approve an overlay through housing choice for Clark Road. For 35 units will be built.
Yeah.
Just for housing wise. So that will need 50% plus one to pass.
Yep.
This will need 2/3 to pass.
That's right.
So I think
2/3 in town meeting.
Yes, in town meeting. So I think that also needs to be considered, and I know that it is being considered, at least by their council, that if you don't have the 2/3, so it doesn't really matter what we think, in a way, if we don't have the 2/3 in town meeting.
Well, it doesn't. We need to make a presentation that explains the situation adequately to town meeting, so that the town meeting can make up its mind and do what it thinks is.
But if 1/3 plus one thinks that we haven't.
That's always true.
Done that, then there's no problem.
That's correct. That was true with zoning for.
So I mean, and this is what I'm talking about, sort of the height and other things. I mean, there may be not just the residents, but other people who 1/3 plus one that may think that the height is just too big.
Yeah.
And to consider that.
Yeah.
And also say there might be 1/3 plus one that feels that the cost of housing compared to the revenues from housing.
You mean the net cost of the town?
Right, in town services, schools and other things, may not be as clear as being presented. So that's why, we have to work with all those parameters to make sure that this project does go through with the 2/3 plus one.
Absolutely. I will say a couple things. One is people have the right to be opposed. Absolutely. So if you're opposed, that's your privilege. And I'm not suggesting that you're opposed to anything. But if you're whatever you're opposed to, that's absolutely right. And similarly, nothing gets built unless the developer makes a profit. So to oppose the developer's profit per se doesn't make a lot of sense.
But nothing gets built if town meeting says no.
Yes, and if town meeting says no, then nothing happens, and we all benefit from. I will not say we are at the mercy of. We benefit from the democratic process, and let's make that very clear in our brains, especially at this juncture in American history. So we benefit from the democratic process in town meeting, and the town meeting will do what it. Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you.